Hey guys, tonight we are not going to be charging into battle, or uncovering a glittering pharaoh's tomb, or sailing the high seas with a band of questionable pirates. No, tonight's journey is much quieter, much slower. We are going to spend the next 500 years raking sand. It sounds simple, I know, but in this simplicity lies a profound and deeply soothing story. We're stepping into the world of the Japanese dry landscape garden, the karesansui, where every grain of gravel and every silent stone holds a universe of meaning. And our only tool for navigating this universe is a simple wooden rake. Honestly, your chances of making it through the first day without being gently asked to leave are, let's just say, slim. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, let me know in the comments what city you are listening from, and what time it is for you. It's always a quiet thrill to see where these stories are landing across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background tone, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The heavy wooden gate groans shut behind you, and the sound is surprisingly final. It's not a loud noise, but it feels like it has just sealed off the entire world. One moment, you are in a bustling, noisy lane filled with the sounds of merchants and cartwheels on a dirt road. The next, you are enveloped in a profound silence. The air here is different. It's still, carrying only the faint, clean scent of sun-baked stone and a hint of damp moss. Before you is not what you would call a garden. There are no flowers, no babbling brook, no manicured hedges. There is only a vast, rectangular sea of pale, whitish-gray gravel. Studding this sea are 5, maybe 6, large, dark stones, clustered in small groups. They look like islands, or perhaps the peaks of submerged mountains. They are ancient, cloaked in patches of deep green and black moss, looking as if they have been sitting here since the dawn of time. A low, plaster wall encloses the entire space, and beyond it, the sloping roof of a temple there and provides the only frame. You stand at the edge, feeling utterly out of place. Your sandals are dusty from the road. Your clothes feel coarse and loud in this silent space. You feel like an intruder, a sudden, clumsy smudge on a perfect painting. Is this it? Is this the famous garden you had heard whispers of? A place of enlightenment. It just looks like rocks and sand. An old man approaches. He moves with a quiet economy of motion, his dark robes barely rustling. He doesn't smile, but his eyes are not unkind. He simply gestures for you to follow, leading you to a small, worn wooden tool shed tucked away in a corner. He opens the door and points. Inside, hanging in a neat row, are several wooden rakes. They are beautiful in their own right. The handles are smooth, polished to a dark sheen by decades of use. The teeth are made of sturdy, dark wood, some wide set, others narrow. He selects one and hands it to you. The weight of it surprises you. It's heavier than it looks, solid and balanced. It feels less like a garden tool and more like a scepter for some forgotten kingdom. You hold it, your knuckles white, feeling the immense pressure of not knowing what to do with it. You look back at the gravel sea. Now that you're closer, you can see it isn't sand. Not really. It's a coarse-grained granite gravel, each piece angular, undistinct. This specific type of gravel, you'll later learn, is called shirakawa-sane. It's prized for its pale, almost white color that reflects the moonlight beautifully, and for its ability to hold the crisp lines raked into it. You tentatively reach down and let a few grains run through your fingers. They feel cool and solid. The old man, your new master, says nothing. He simply points toward the vast, undisturbed gravel. His meaning is clear. Your job has begun. But what is the job? To make it neat, to flatten it. The silence is your only instruction, and it is a terrifyingly vague one. This is the essence of a karesansui, a dry landscape garden. It's a cornerstone of Japanese Zen Buddhism, an art form that strips nature down to its barest essentials. The gravel is not gravel. It is water. It is the vast, unpredictable ocean or a flowing river. The rocks are not rocks. They are islands, mountains, or even sacred animals like a tiger and her cubs. It's a landscape of the mind, meant to be contemplated, to calm the spirit and open the door to meditation. At least, that's the common understanding. But as you stand there, on the precipice of this silent ocean, a question takes root in your mind. You notice the wide, polished veranda of the temple building that overlooks the garden. It is the perfect, elevated viewing platform. It occurs to you that the garden is composed like a painting, meant to be seen from that specific spot. And this is a quiet debate that historians and Zen scholars still have today. Were these gardens primarily meditative tools for the monks who tended them, a space to be entered and worked within? Or were they sophisticated art installations for the wealthy patrons and shoguns who funded the temples, meant to be viewed from a distance, like a priceless scroll, a symbol of their power and refined taste? Was this space a tool for the monk, or a landscape for the Lord? You don't have an answer. All you have is this heavy rake in your hands and the unnerving feeling that the great, silent stones are watching you, waiting. You feel a bead of sweat trickle down your temple. 500 years of this starts now, and you don't even know how to make the first mark. You stand there for what feels like an eternity, the rake feeling heavier with each passing second. The silence presses in, and the stones, from this angle, seem to be judging your hesitation, just as you're about to make a desperate, clumsy move. The old master takes a slow step toward you. He gently places his hand over yours on the handle of the rake, his skin dry and cool like ancient paper. With an almost imperceptible pressure, he lifts the rake from your grasp and places it carefully back against the shed wall. A wave of relief washes over you, so profound it almost makes your knees buckle. He doesn't speak. Instead, he gestures with a slight tilt of his head toward the temple veranda, the polished wooden platform that runs along the building, overlooking the gravel sea. He leads you there, his soft-soled tabi socks making no sound on the worn earth. You clamber onto the deck, your dusty sandals feeling like a desecration on the smooth, dark wood. He motions for you to sit, not just anywhere, but in a specific spot, dead center, where the wood is slightly more worn than the surrounding planks. He guides you into the formal Iza posture, knees folded, sitting back on your heels. It's immediately uncomfortable, a posture of submission and intense focus. From here, everything changes. Your perspective shifts. You are no longer in the garden, but looking upon it. The arrangement of stones, which seemed almost random from the ground, now snaps into a coherent, deliberate composition. The master sits beside you, the silence stretching between you, comfortable and instructive. He waits for your breathing to slow, for the frantic energy of the outside world to finally drain from your body. After a long while, he raises a single, bony finger. He points to the largest stone, a tall, dark monolith that leans slightly to the right. It's the anchor of the whole scene. Dima, he whispers, the word a mere puff of air. Mountain. Your eyes follow his gesture, and suddenly, it's no longer a rock. You see it. You see the strong, unyielding spine of a mountain, its peak shrouded in the metaphorical mist of the sky. Then he points to a lower, flatter group of 3 stones nestled together. Shima, he says. Islands. You see them too. A small archipelago in a vast, pale ocean, their surfaces weathered by invisible waves. He continues to point, not naming anything else, but letting you see. You notice how one stone seems to be fleeing from another, how a small, low rock seems to bow in deference to a larger one. They have relationships. They are in conversation. This is your first lesson in the language of stones. In the West, you might build a garden by imposing a human design onto nature. Here, the philosophy is to find the inherent character of the stone and place it where it wants to be. You're learning about is haigumi, the ancient art of stone arrangement. The mainstream understanding is that these arrangements are symbolic landscapes, but it's much deeper than that. The master, in his silent way, is teaching you the principles laid out in the Sakuti Iki, the records of garden making. a text from nearly 1,000 years ago. It's one of the oldest manuals on landscape architecture in the world, and its core principle is to follow the request of the stone. You don't just dump a rock in a hole. You must study it from all sides, understand its center of gravity, its face, its front and back. It's a bit like a cosmic game of Tetris, but one where the pieces have been sitting for 1,000,000 years and have very strong opinions about where they should go. This is a fascinating bit of deep history. Some of the most famous Zen gardens we see today still follow these ancient, almost mystical, guidelines. He then gestures to the empty space, the gravel between the stones. This is the concept of ma. The beauty of the void, the interval. The space is just as important as the object. The silence is as important as the word. The stones derive their power not just from their own form, but from the vast, empty expanse that surrounds them. That emptiness is what gives them meaning, what allows the mind of the viewer to fill in the rest of the landscape. You feel your legs beginning to cramp, the pins and needles sensation starting in your feet, but you dare not move. You are starting to understand that this garden isn't just a place. It's a diagram of a philosophy. It's a sermon preached in stone and gravel. And this brings up one of the great ongoing debates among scholars of Japanese garden history. Who actually made these? The common image is that of a Zen monk, deep in a meditative trance, placing each stone with spiritual insight. But the reality is likely more complex. The existence of texts like the Sakuti Iki suggests a codified, professional practice. During the golden age of these gardens, there were highly sought-after professional designers, sometimes called as haidatsu, literally, stone-setting priests. These individuals were part monk, part artisan, part engineer. They were masters of geology, engineering, and aesthetics, and they were hired by powerful shoguns and monasteries to create these stunning landscapes. So, as you sit here, you're caught between two ideas. Is the arrangement before you the result of pure, spontaneous spiritual insight from a single enlightened mind? Or is it the calculated masterpiece of a professional landscape architect, applying ancient, field-tested principles of design and balance? The historical record is hazy, and experts still argue whether the primary creators were monks seeking enlightenment or skilled craftsmen seeking a patron. The master seems to sense your wandering thoughts. He gives a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if to say, yes, that question is part of it too. He rises in one fluid motion, leaving you alone on the veranda. The sun has shifted, and the shadows cast by the great stones have stretched, becoming long, dark fingers reaching across the gravel sea. The language is there. You can't speak it yet, but for the first time, you can just begin to hear its whispers. Days pass, or maybe it's a week. Time moves differently here, measured not by clocks but by the slow crawl of shadows across the gravel. You spend your waking hours on that veranda, simply looking. You watch how the garden changes with the light. In the sharp, direct sun of midday, the gravel is a brilliant, almost painful white, and the stones seem hard, their details stark and exposed. But in the soft, angled light of morning and late afternoon, the scene transforms. The gravel takes on a softer, warmer hue, and the moss on the stones glows with an inner luminescence. The shadows lengthen, creating new shapes, new relationships between the islands of stone. You are learning to see. Your duties are simple, almost menial. You sweep the fallen leaves from the wooden veranda with a soft broom made of bound twigs. You wipe the polished wood with a damp cloth until it gleams. You help prepare the simple meals of rice and pickles. You do all this in silence, your mind still turning over the language of the stones. Then, one morning, the master meets you not on the veranda, but by the tool shed. He hands you the same rake he gave you on the first day. This time, you take it with a sense of purpose, not panic. You've been studying the existing patterns in the gravel, the learn, straight lines that run parallel to the veranda, representing a calm, still sea, and the swirling, circular patterns raked around the base of each stone, suggesting the way water eddies around an obstacle. He leads you to a small, hidden corner of the garden, a practice area screened off by a low fence. It's a miniature version of the main garden, with just a few small stones and a patch of that same pale gravel. He takes another rake for himself. He stands for a moment, his body relaxed, his eyes on the gravel. He holds the rake loosely, his hands spaced apart on the handle. Then, with a motion that seems to originate from his very center, his hips and torso moving as one, he draws the rake toward him. The movement is hypnotic. It is slow, deliberate, and perfectly even. The wooden teeth sink into the gravel to a precise depth, creating shallow furrows and high ridges. The sound is a soft, crisp, rhythmic sigh-change, like a long, slow exhalation. He doesn't look down at the rake, but at a point far ahead, as if he is pulling the line from the horizon toward his feet. The line he creates is impossibly straight, a perfect channel in the miniature sea. He steps back, gestures for you to try. You step forward, your heart pounding a little. You try to mimic his posture, his grip. You place the rake on the gravel. Take a breath, and pull. The result is a disaster. Your line is wobbly, a drunken snake zigzagging across the practice area. The teeth dig into deep in some places, creating ugly gouges, and skate over the surface in others, leaving patches untouched. The sound is a jerky, grating screech, not a soothing whisper. It looks like a giant cat has scratched the earth in a fit of pique. A flicker of shame washes over you. It looked so simple. The master shows no reaction, no disappointment, no frustration. He simply picks up his own raking. In 2 or 3 fluid passes, completely erases your chaotic scrawl, restoring the gravel to a smooth, blank canvas. Then he gestures again. Try again. And so it begins. Your life becomes a cycle of drawing lines and erasing them. Go, erase, repeat, over and over. You are not just learning to use a tool. You are learning to control your own body. You realize the tremor in the line comes from the tension in your shoulders. The inconsistency and depth comes from your unsteady breathing. The crookedness comes from your eyes darting back and forth, focused on the immediate result rather than the intent. This repetitive act is a form of moving meditation, a core principle of Zen practice. The goal isn't just to create a perfect pattern. The goal is to get your mind, body, and spirit to work in perfect harmony. It's about being entirely present in a simple, physical task. It's a concept known as samu, or mindful work, where even the most mundane chores, like sweeping or raking, are treated as opportunities for spiritual training. It's a very practical, hands-on path to enlightenment, far removed from just sitting and chanting. As you practice, you learn a strange little fact. The white gravel, the shirakawa-sane, is surprisingly difficult to source. It traditionally came from the Kamo River in Kyoto, but over the centuries, sourcing that specific type of weathered granite has become harder. Many famous gardens now use crushed, brilliantly white marble instead. It's easier to maintain and shines brighter in the sun. But the traditionalists, like your master, insist on the original granite. They believe the subtle, off-white, slightly irregular quality of the natural stone has a more profound wabi-sabi character, that beauty of imperfection in nature. It's less dazzling, but more authentic. See, this also brings us to another historical debate. How often were these gardens actually raked? Popular imagination, and many modern temple practices, suggest it's a daily ritual. A monk rises at dawn and perfectly manicures the garden for the day. However, some garden historians and Zen scholars question this. They propose that, in the early days of these gardens, the raking might have been done far less frequently, perhaps only for special occasions or when the patterns were significantly disturbed by weather or foot traffic. The idea of a perfectly manicured garden every single day might be a more modern interpretation, influenced by a desire to present a pristine image for tourists and visitors. The historical truth might be that these gardens were allowed to exist in a more natural, slightly untidy state for longer periods. Was the constant, repetitive act of raking always the point, or is that a story we now tell ourselves about the past? You don't know the answer. All you know is the feeling of the rake handle in your hands, the strain in your back, and the soft HHH of the gravel. Days turn into weeks. Your lines are still not perfect, but they are straighter. The wobble is less pronounced. You can now draw a single, 10-foot line without a major disaster. And in the process of drawing that first, slow, but intentional ripple, you feel a tiny flicker of something new. It's not pride. It's a quiet sense of connection. You are no longer just looking at the sea. You are, for the first time, helping to create it, after what feels like 100 seasons spent in your small, hidden practice corner. The day finally comes. The master finds you at dawn, not with a gesture, but with a single, spoken word. Come. He leads you out of your sandy sanctuary and onto the veranda of the main garden. The vast sea of gravel lies before you, still and perfect in the pre-dawn light, its patterns from the previous day still crisp. He hands you the rake, not a practice rake, but one of the old, dark, venerable ones from the tool shed. Then he points to the entire expanse. The message is clear. Today, you graduate. Your heart does a nervous little flip. This is the real thing. There are no do-overs here. No quick erasures. Every mark you make will be part of the finished work, on display for all to see. You take a breath, trying to recall the feeling of calm you occasionally found in the practice yard. You step down from the veranda onto the special, flat-topped yakuishi or roll stones that serve as entry points, placed so you don't disturb the gravel. As you prepare to make your first pull, the master holds up a hand, stopping you. He points with his chin toward a specific area near the edge of the garden, where a small stone lantern sits almost hidden behind a larger rock formation. He shakes his head, a subtle but firm gesture. Then he points to the path you are meant to walk while raking, a specific, invisible lane you must stick to. You realize there is a choreography to this, a set of movements as rigid and unspoken as a note play. You are learning the silent rules. Rule 1. Apparently, is that some areas are out of bounds. The space behind certain stones is never to be entered, never to be raked. Why? The master doesn't explain. Later, you might overhear a senior monk mentioning that it is the space for the spirits, or that it represents an unreachable, mythical land like Mount Horai, the island of the immortals. Disturbing it would be a profound act of disrespect. Rule 2 is about your feet. As you rake, you must walk backward, erasing your own footprints as you go. The garden, when you are finished, must look as though it were created by an invisible hand. There can be no trace of the maker, no sign of the labor. This is incredibly difficult. It requires immense spatial awareness, planning your route in reverse, all while maintaining the slow, rhythmic pull of the rake. It's a physical manifestation of the Buddhist concept of selflessness. The art is paramount. The artist must disappear. Rule 3 is about the lines themselves. The long, straight lines you are drawing today represent tranquility, a calm sea under a winter sky. They must be perfectly parallel to the temple building, reinforcing the sense of order and stability. If the master had wanted to represent waves, he would have instructed you to make undulating, curved lines, and those curves would have to follow their own rules, flowing in a naturalistic way, never appearing forced or artificial. The patterns are a vocabulary, and you must use the correct word for the intended feeling. As you begin your slow, backward journey across the gravel, you become intensely aware of these constraints. The silent rules make the simple act of raking 1,000 times more complex. This is not about creative expression in the Western sense, where an artist is celebrated for breaking rules. Here, mastery is shown by working perfectly within the rules, by achieving a kind of sublime perfection through discipline and restraint. This is a common theme in many traditional Japanese arts, from calligraphy to the tea ceremony. The form is strict, but within that form, there is infinite room for nuance and grace. Here's a fascinating, lesser-known tidbit about these rules. Some of them might have a surprisingly practical origin. For example, the rule about never stepping in certain areas isn't just spiritual. Mosses are a critical and painstakingly cultivated element of these gardens, especially around the base of the stones. A single misplaced step could crush a patch of moss that has taken decades, or even centuries, to grow. So the sacred, unreachable space is also a very pragmatic please don't kill the priceless. Ancient moss zone, the spiritual explanation and the practical necessity grew together, reinforcing each other over time. This leads to a question that garden historians and anthropologists still debate. To what extent were these rules codified and universal? We know of texts like the Sakute Iki, but many of these garden tending rules were likely passed down as an oral tradition. Specific to each temple and each master, was there a single, unified rulebook for karesansui across all of Japan? Or was it a patchwork of local traditions and master-apprentice lineages? A monk at Y, O, and G might have a fiercely different set of unwritten rules than a monk at Zen Inn, even if their gardens look superficially similar to an outsider. The idea of a single, monolithic Zen garden tradition is likely a modern simplification. You are so focused on the rules. Don't step here, erase your footprints, keep the line straight, that something remarkable happens. You stop thinking about yourself. Your anxiety is about doing a good job. Your pride in being chosen, your fear of failure, it all just fades away. There's no room for it. All of your mental energy is consumed by the task at hand, by the simple, complex reality of the rake, the gravel, your feet, your breath. You are just a pair of hands, a pair of eyes, a set of movements in service of the garden. You'd have, without even realizing it, disappeared. When you finally reach the other side and step back onto the veranda, the sun is higher in the sky. You turn and look. The sea of gravel is pristine, its lines radiating a deep, powerful calm. It looks untouched by human hands, and for the first time, you understand. The rules aren't there to restrict you. They are there to set you free. You settle into a rhythm. The seasons turn, marked by the scent of cherry blossoms carried on the wind, the drone of cicadas in the summer heat, the sharp, clean smell of autumn leaves, and the profound hush of a winter morning when a thin blanket of snow dusts the stones. Your world is this rectangle of gravel and stone. Your hands, once soft, are now calloused and strong. The rake feels like an extension of your arms. The silent rules are no longer rules. They are instinct. Your life is one of profound peace, a bubble of meditative calm. But this bubble has a wall, and just beyond that wall, the world is on fire. It is the middle of the 16th century, the height of the Sengoku Jidai, the warring states period. Japan is not a unified country but a fractured, chaotic landscape of warring clans. Ambitious daimyo, or warlords, raise armies, betray their allies, and burn castles to the ground in a relentless struggle for power. Peasants are conscripted into armies, harvests fail, and famine is a constant threat. Life outside the temple walls is brutal, uncertain, and loud. You hear it sometimes. A distant rumble that isn't thunder, perhaps the sound of a small army on the move. The panic shouting in the nearby town when a samurai procession, arrogant and quick to draw swords, passes through. You see the smoke rising on the horizon, a smudge of chaos against the serene blue sky. And you know, with a cold certainty, that a village or rival temple is burning. One afternoon, while you are meticulously tracing the currents around a stone island, a young, frantic monk rushes onto the veranda. He speaks in hushed, urgent tones to your master. A battle has been fought just a few miles away. The local lord has been defeated. The victorious army is pacifying the area, which is a polite way of saying they are looting and killing. The master's face remains a mask of calm, but you see his hands clench for a brief moment inside his wide sleeves. He dismisses the young monk and turns his gaze back to the garden. To you, his eyes seem to say, continue. The work is the only anchor in a storm. So you continue. You pull the rake. The soft shy ch-ch of the gravel a fragile counterpoint to the fear that now hangs in the air. This contrast is the very soul of the Zen garden in this era. It is not an escape from reality. It is a confrontation with it. The garden's absolute, radical simplicity is a deliberate response to the world's violent complexity. Its permanence is a statement against the world's transience. Its silence is an act of defiance against the world's noise. For the monks who live here, and for the samurai patrons who fund the temple, this garden is a psychological fortress. This is a mainstream historical understanding. These gardens flourished during one of Japan's most violent periods precisely because they offered a necessary spiritual and mental sanctuary. These samurai lord, like the famous Hatujame Masanaga who is thought to have patronized the original Ryong, could spend his days soaked in blood and betrayal, and then come to a place like this to find a moment of clarity, to contemplate the eternal truths represented by the unmoving stones. The garden was a spiritual washing machine for a soiled soul. But here's a quirky, less discussed aspect of that relationship. These temples were not just passive sanctuaries. They were often powerful players in the political landscape. They owned vast estates, had their own armies of warrior monks, sohei in some cases, and made strategic alliances. A powerful daimyo was just donating to a temple out of piety. He was securing an ally, a safe place to store his treasures, a neutral ground for negotiations, and perhaps even a place to retreat to if he lost a battle. The serene garden you are raking might very well be funded by the profits from a recent, bloody military campaign. The peace within the walls is directly subsidized by the violence without. This leads to a fascinating historical debate that scholars are still untangling. How much did the chaos of the Sengoku period directly influence the design of the gardens? One school of thought argues that the designs became more austere and abstract because of the violence. As the world became more chaotic, the art retreated further into minimalism and symbolism. But another theory suggests a more direct link. Some historians have proposed that certain stone arrangements aren't just abstract landscapes, but are actually schematic maps of famous battles, or strategic diagrams of fortress defenses. Could that cluster of stones you see as islands actually represent a famous castle and its outlying forts? Is the raked gravel a representation of the sea? Or is it a no-man's land between two opposing armies? It's a provocative idea, and one that lacks definitive proof, but it forces you to look at the garden in a new light. It suggests that even in this place of ultimate peace, the echo of the sword is always present. The garden might not just be a refuge from the war, but a reflection of it. The sun sets. The fighting, for now, has not reached your gates. You finish your work as dusk settles, the lines in the gravel catching the last faint light. The garden is still, perfect. It is a promise of a peace that does not exist in the world beyond the wall. And as you put your rake away, you understand that your job is not just to tend the garden. It is to hold a space for sanity in an insane world. You are a guardian of calm in an age of chaos. Years fold into one another like the pleats of a well-worn robe. The calluses on your hands are now thick, comfortable layers of hardened skin. You no longer think about the rake, the gravel, or the lines. The work flows through you, a natural rhythm like breathing. Your hair is perhaps a little thinner, a little grayer at the temples. The fires of the Sengoku period have, for the moment, receded into the distance, replaced by the uneasy peace of a new regime. One day, you are tending to the moss at the base of the main stone. The mountain, it's a delicate task, using small bamboo tools to remove stray weeds and fallen leaves without disturbing the ancient, velvety green carpet. You notice a new crack in the stone. It's not a large fissure, just a hairline fracture near the base, almost invisible unless you are looking for it. It washed there last season. The great, unmoving mountain is, it seems, moving after all. Imperceptibly, yes, but it is changing. It is weathering. It is aging. A younger version of yourself might have been along, might have seen this as a flaw, a sign of decay that needed to be fixed or hidden. But now, you feel a strange sense of quiet acceptance, almost of kinship. You look from the new crack in the stone to the lines on the back of your own hand. They are part of the same story. You are beginning to truly understand wabi-sabi. It's a term you've heard whispered by the master, a concept that hangs in the air of the temple like incense smoke. It's a notoriously difficult idea to translate directly into English. Wabi speaks to a kind of rustic simplicity, a quietness, an appreciation for the understated and the humble. Sabi relates to the beauty that comes with age, the patina of time, the visual poetry of wear and imperfection. Together, they form a uniquely Japanese aesthetic, a worldview that finds profound beauty in things that are imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete. The crack in the stone is a perfect example of Sabi. It doesn't diminish the stone's beauty. It enhances it. It tells a story. It speaks of the hundreds of summers and winters the stone has endured. It is a mark of its authenticity, its resilience. In the West, you might polish a tarnished silver cup to make it look new. In the world of wabi-sabi, the tarnish itself is where the beauty lies. This philosophy is everywhere in the garden, once you learn to see it. It's in the slightly irregular shape of a hand-thrown pot that holds a single, sparse flower arrangement in the master's quarters. It's in the uneven glaze on your favorite tea bowl, which fits so perfectly in your hands. It's in the way the moss grows unevenly on the stones, thicker in the shaded, damp crevices. The garden is not a monument to sterile perfection. It's a celebration of life as it actually is, flawed, fleeting, and beautiful because of it, not in spite of it. This is the core, mainstream understanding of wabi-sabi and its connection to Zen. It's about finding peace with the natural cycle of growth, decay, and death. It's an antidote to the human obsession with chasing an impossible, static perfection. But here's a quirky little detail that often gets lost in the philosophical discussions. The imperfect aesthetics of wabi-sabi were also incredibly, and ironically, fashionable during this period, and later in the Edo period. Having a tea bowl with a deliberate form made by a famous master, or owning a piece of calligraphy with a spontaneous ink splash, was the ultimate status symbol among the wealthy and powerful. It was a kind of poverty chic for the 1%. A powerful samurai lord would spend a fortune to acquire a simple, cracked, rustic-looking tea bowl because it showed he was above the gaudy, golden tastes of the newly rich. He had true, refined, wabi-sabi taste. So the humble aesthetic you are contemplating has a parallel life as a form of high-stakes cultural currency. This duality leads to an ongoing debate among art historians and cultural critics. Is wabi-sabi truly a natural and humble aesthetic that arises organically from Zen philosophy? Or is it a highly curated, artificial, and even elitist style that was deliberately constructed and marketed to the ruling class? When you look at the imperfect crack on that stone, are you having a pure, Zen moment of insight into the nature of reality? Or are you appreciating a very carefully selected and placed flaw that was chosen by a master designer to signal a specific, high-status aesthetic to a discerning patron? In other words, how much of this natural imperfection is actually a very deliberate and sophisticated form of artifice? You run your finger along the tiny crack. To you, it doesn't feel like a status symbol. It feels like a truth. You look around the garden. You notice a single paving stone on the path is slightly tilted. You see how the plaster on the surrounding wall is discolored and stained by rain in one corner. You see the subtle asymmetry in the branching of the single, gnarled pine tree that leans over the wall. For years, your goal has been to create perfect, straight lines in the gravel, a striving for a kind of geometric order. But now you see that this perfection is set within a world of beautiful, inevitable imperfection. The unchanging lines you rake every day are a meditation on the fact that everything around them, the stone, the moss, the wood, the old, is constantly, quietly, and beautifully falling apart. The garden holds two opposing ideas in perfect, silent balance, the eternal and the ephemeral. And in that balance, you find a peace that is deeper than any you have known before. One evening, as the sky turns a deep indigo and the first stars begin to appear, a traveling monk seeks shelter at your temple. He is old, with a face like a dried apple, but his eyes are bright and alert. He joins you and your master for the meager evening meal. After the silent grace, he begins to speak, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. He says, just come from the capital, from Kyoto. He has spent a week contemplating the garden at Ryong, the temple of the peaceful dragon. Your master nods, a sign of deep respect for Ryong. Even in this remote temple, the name is spoken with a certain awe. It is considered by many to be the absolute pinnacle of karesansui art, the most enigmatic and perfect of all the dry landscape gardens. The traveling monk describes the garden, and it sounds much like your own. A rectangle of white gravel, a collection of stones. But at Ryong, there are 15 stones, arranged in 5 distinct groups. He lowers his voice, leaning forward conspiratorially. And you know, he says, the mystery holds true. From no point on the veranda can you see all 15 stones at once. You feel a little shiver of intrigue. This is the famous riddle of our Ryong. The garden is designed with such subtle, overlapping precision that no matter where you sit on the viewing platform, at least one stone is always hidden from your line of sight by another. You can see 14, but never the full 15. The monk continues, explaining the popular interpretations. Some say it relates to the concept of wabi-sabi, that the world is always, by its nature, incomplete, and perfection is unattainable. You can never see the whole picture at once. Others say it's a lesson in humility, a reminder that there are always things beyond our immediate perception. The most common Zen interpretation is that only through achieving enlightenment can one's spiritual life finally perceive the 15th hidden stone. It's a physical manifestation of a spiritual puzzle. You try to picture it in your mind's eye, a landscape of deliberate concealment. It's a stark contrast to your own garden, where every stone is clearly visible from the central viewing spot. The idea is captivating. It's a garden that plays a game with you, a game about the nature of perception and knowledge. This famous riddle is, of course, a well-known piece of historical lore, shared with millions of tourists who visit the temple every year. It's the garden's primary claim to fame. But here's a fascinating, and somewhat controversial, little secret that many guidebooks won't tell you. The riddle might not be a riddle at all. For a start, some modern researchers, using photography and computer modeling, have found that there are, in fact, a few obscure, non-standard viewing points from which all 15 stones can be seen at once, particularly if you are taller than the average 16th century Japanese monk. But more importantly, there is a distinct lack of historical evidence that anyone even mentioned this riddle before the 20th century. You can search through centuries of writings by monks, poets, and visitors who describe the garden, and you will find praise for its beauty, its tranquility, its brilliant composition, but you won't find anyone talking about the invisible 15th stone. The idea seems to have appeared relatively recently, gaining popularity in the post-war period and becoming an indelible part of the garden's mythos. This leads to a fierce debate among historians and art critics. Is the riddle of the 15th stone an ancient, profound Zen code embedded in the very design of the garden? Or is it a modern invention, a clever piece of storytelling, perhaps even an early form of tourist marketing, that has been retroactively applied to the garden? Did the original designers, sometime in the 15th or 16th century, painstakingly arrange these stones with this specific visual trick in mind? Or did we, in the modern era, invent a compelling story that made the garden even more mysterious and attractive? The historical record is silent, leaving the riddle itself as a kind of koan about the nature of history and how we create meaning from the past. The traveling monk, of course, knows nothing of this scholarly debate. For him, the mystery is real, a profound truth he has just experienced. He speaks of the arrangement itself, which is often said to resemble a tiger leading her cubs across the water, shikoro watashi, the stones representing the animals leaping from island to island. Your master listens patiently, his head slightly cocked. When the monk has finished, the master says something quiet and profound. Perhaps, he says, his voice barely a rustle, the most important stone at our Ryong is not one of the 15. Perhaps it is the one you are sitting on. He means the viewer, the mind that is contemplating the garden, The landscape is not complete without the consciousness that perceives it. The conversation ends. The monk, weary from his travels, is shown to a simple cell for the night. You lie on your thin futon, staring into the darkness. You think about the garden outside your wall, your own familiar sea of gravel, and you think of the unseen garden at Unwind, a garden that deliberately hides a part of itself. It's a strange and unsettling idea. For years, you have worked to create clarity, to make a landscape of the mind that is open and readable. But now you wonder about the power of the unseen, the beauty of the withheld, the wisdom of the missing piece. The world, you realize, is not just made of what you can see. It is also shaped by what is hidden from you. The traveling monk's stories of Unwind linger in your mind, and you start to notice the finer details of your own work with a renewed curiosity. Your focus shifts from the grand composition of the garden to the tools that create it. For years, you have used the same heavy, white-toothed rake for the main parallel lines, a familiar weight in your hands. You thought you knew it, understood it, but now you realize your knowledge is incomplete. One morning, the master approaches you while you are cleaning the tool shed. He points to the row of rakes hanging on the wall. There are at least 5 different kinds. You had always seen them, of course, but you never truly paid them any mind. They were just rakes. Now, the master takes them down one by one, laying them on a clean cloth on the floor. The first is your old friend, the one you use every day. Its teeth are thick, wooden pegs, set about 4 inches apart. It creates deep, strong, parallel furrows, the image of a vast, calm, deep ocean. It's the workhorse, the foundation of the garden's placid mood. Then he shows you another. It's lighter, and its teeth are much finer and set closer together. They are like the tines of a huge fork. He explains, in his typical economy of words, that this rake is used for smaller, more detailed work. It creates a pattern of much finer lines, representing not the open sea, but perhaps a gentle, shallow stream, or the delicate, shimmering surface of a pond. Using this rake requires an even lighter touch, a more subtle control of pressure and speed. Next comes a strange-looking one. It's smaller, almost like a hand-held claw, with only 4 or 5 long, curved teeth. This, he demonstrates by drawing in a small sandbox, is not for making parallel lines at all. It's for creating the swirling patterns around the bases of the stones, the sui moan, or water rings. The gentle curve of the teeth helps to create a perfect, concentric ripple, the kind of pattern water makes when it meets an obstacle. It's a specialist tool, designed for a single, crucial task. To master this tool is to master the art of the eddy and the current. Finally, he shows you the most curious one of all. It's a heavy, solid-looking block of wood, and instead of teeth, its bottom is carved with a continuous, wavy pattern, like a piece of corrugated roofing. This is a pattern rake. You don't drag it to create furrows. You press it into the smoothed gravel, lift it, and press it again, creating a repeating, decorative pattern of waves. It's a kind of stamp for the sand. He explains this is a more decorative style, sometimes used for special occasions or in gardens that are more ornamental than meditative. It represents a different school of thought, one that leans more towards overt design than naturalistic symbolism. You are fascinated. You had assumed raking the sand was a single, monolithic activity, but now you see it's a craft with a whole spectrum of techniques and a specialized toolkit, as complex as that of a master calligrapher with their different brushes and inks. Each rake is a different brush, capable of a different stroke, creating a different texture and mood on the canvas of gravel. This is the mainstream, practical knowledge of the garden tender, the kind of detail that defines true mastery. Now for a strange, lesser-known tidbit. The evolution of the rake itself is a tiny, unwritten chapter of Japanese history. The very earliest gardens probably didn't use these specialized wooden rakes at all. They likely used simple bamboo brooms or branches to smooth the gravel. The development of these specialized, toothed rakes parallels the increasing sophistication and stylization of the gardens themselves. as the designs became more abstract and focused on the patterns in the sand. The tools evolved to meet the new artistic demands. You can almost trace the history of karesansui by looking at the increasing complexity of the rakes on the wall. This evolution of tools brings up a subtle but persistent debate among garden historians. Does the tool shape the art, or does the art shape the tool? On one hand, you could argue that the invention of a new type of rake, say one that could easily create swirling patterns, would have inspired garden designers to incorporate more of those patterns into their work. The new technology opened up new artistic possibilities. On the other hand, you could argue the opposite. A master designer first conceived of a garden with swirling water patterns in his mind, and then he commissioned a craftsman to build a tool that could bring his vision to life. The artistic vision demanded a new technology. It's a classic chicken and egg problem, and it applies to almost any field of art or technology. Did the invention of the electric guitar create rock and roll, or did the desire for a louder, more aggressive sound lead to the invention of the electric guitar? Historians still argue about which is the primary driver of change, the tool or the vision. As you look at the different rakes laid out before you, you realize you're looking at the physical evidence of this very debate. The master gestures for you to pick up the finest rake. He leads you back to your practice corner. Your training is not over. You have mastered the calm sea. Now you must learn the gentle stream. You place the new rake on the gravel. It feels unfamiliar, delicate. You pull, and the sound is different. Not a deep shy chait, but a higher pitched, softer cs, the sound of 100 tiny whispers. A new tool, a new sound, a new feeling. The garden, you are learning, contains multitudes. As you grow more confident with the different rakes, a new dimension of the garden slowly reveals itself to you. Your focus, once consumed by the vast sea of gravel, is now drawn to the islands of stone, specifically to the living skin that clings to them, the moss. For years, you saw the moss as just a splash of green, a decorative element that made the old stones look even older. But the master begins to assign you new tasks. He hands you a small bucket of water and a soft brush, the kind a painter might use. He leads you to one of the smaller stone groupings and points to a patch of moss that looks a little dry, a little faded. Your task, he shows you, is to gently moisten it, to clean away any specks of dust or intrusive lichen, to nurture it. This is not a quick or simple job. It is painstaking, meditative work. You spend hours crouched by a single stone, tending to its miniature, velvety forest. You learn that moss is not one thing. There are dozens of varieties in this garden alone. There's the spiky, deep green sugi cedar moss, which resembles a tiny forest of evergreen trees. There's the soft, pillow waihego crawling moss, which forms dense, cushiony mats. Each has its own preference for lightened moisture, its own growth habit, its own unique texture and color. You learn to read the moss. You can tell which side of a stone gets the morning sun by the subtle difference in the moss's vibrancy. You learn to recognize the signs of stress, a slight yellowing, a brittleness to the touch, and how to respond, perhaps by giving it a little more water, or by reading a small, temporary shade to protect it from the harshest midday sun. Your world, once measured in yards of raked gravel, now shrinks to the millimeter scale of a single moss frond. This intense focus on moss is a key part of maintaining a mature Japanese garden. It's not just about aesthetics. It's about philosophy. Moss represents the beauty of age and tranquility. It grows slowly, patiently, over decades and centuries. To cultivate moss is to cultivate patience itself. While the raked gravel represents the ephemeral, the ever-changing patterns of water, the moss represents a deeper, slower, more ancient kind of time. It's the living embodiment of wabi-sabi, the beauty of age made manifest in a soft, green carpet. Now for a wonderfully weird and little-known fact about moss cultivation in Japan. It can get incredibly competitive and scientific. While your temple's methods are ancient and simple, modern Japanese moss cultivation is a serious business. There are entire farms dedicated to growing perfect sheets of specific moss varieties, except for lawn. There's even a special concoction that gardeners use to encourage moss growth, a kind of moss milkshake. The recipe varies, but it often includes things like yogurt, buttermilk, and sometimes even beer, all blended up with a starter culture of dried moss. The mixture is then painted onto rocks or soil where you want the moss to grow. The sugars and acids in the mix are said to create the perfect environment for the spores to take hold. Imagine a Zen master carefully painting a rock with a yogurt and moss smoothie. It's a delightful intersection of ancient tradition and modern horticultural know-how. Your slow, deliberate work with the moss brings a new question to the forefront of your mind. You are tending something that is alive. The gravel is inert. The stones are ancient but not living in the same way. The moss, however, is a delicate, breathing ecosystem, and this highlights a subtle tension within the philosophy of the karesansui garden itself, a topic scholars still debate. Is the dry landscape garden an attempt to imitate nature, or to transcend it? One argument is that the karesansui is the ultimate abstraction of nature. It strips away all the messy, transient, and distracting elements. The flowers that bloom and die, the leaves that fall, the water that evaporates, to get to the timeless, unchanging essence of a landscape. In this view, the garden is more of a philosophical diagram than a natural scene. The moss, in this interpretation, is a slight contradiction, a small concession to the living, changing world. But another school of thought argues that the garden is not meant to be entirely sterile and abstract. It is a place where the timeless the stones and the ephemeral the raked gravel meet the living and growing the moss. It is a carefully balanced composition of all three elements. In this view, the moss is not a contradiction. It is a crucial ingredient, the bridge between the inert symbolism of the stones and the organic world. It softens the hard edges of the philosophy, reminding the viewer that even in a place of profound stillness and abstraction, life persists, slow, quiet, and green. You don't have an answer. You only have the feeling of the soft bristles of the brush on the moss, the cool dampness on your fingertips. You are no longer just the raker of the sea. You are the keeper of the forests that grow on the mountain island. You are tending to a life form that operates on a timid scale far slower than your own. Some of the patches you are caring for were probably here long before you were born and will be here long after you are gone. As you gently clean a single, perfect cushion of Heigo-kei, you feel a sense of humility. You are not its master. You are merely its temporary guardian, a fleeting steward for a life far more patient and ancient than your own. One crisp autumn afternoon, the master informs you that a special guest is arriving. Not a warlord or a traveling monk, but a master of another art form, Chano-Yu, the way of tea. A small, formal tea gathering is to be held, and your role will be to ensure the garden is in a state of perfect, understated readiness. This is a significant event, the connection between Zen Buddhism, the dry landscape garden, and the tea ceremony is a deep and intricate one. They are considered sister arts, different paths leading up to the same mountain peak of awareness and mindfulness. You spend the morning working with a focus so intense it feels like you are holding your breath for hours. You use the fine-toothed rake to create a pattern of serene, shallow ripples in the gravel. You tend to the moss, ensuring it is vibrant and moist. You sweep every last fallen pine needle from the veranda. The tea master arrives. He is a small, neat man who moves with a quiet grace that reminds you of your own master. He doesn't go to the main temple building. Instead, he is led to the small, rustic tea house that stands in a different part of the temple grounds, a part you rarely enter. This tea house, the Chazetsu, is a world unto itself. It is a tiny, humble hut with earthen walls, bamboo latticed windows, and a low doorway that forces guests to bow deeply upon entering, a gesture of humility. Your master invites you to join, not as a guest, but as a silent observer. You sit at the very back of the small room, trying to make yourself invisible. From your position, you can see out the window into another, smaller garden, a different style called a a roji, or dewy path. It's a simple, rustic path of stepping stones, with damp, green moss and a few artfully placed ferns. It's designed to be a transition, a space to cleanse the dust of the world from your mind before entering the tea house. The ceremony begins. It is a slow, deliberate ballet of precise movements. The tea master handles each object: the iron kettle, the bamboo whisk, the ceramic tea bowl, with a reverence that seems to transform them from simple utensils into sacred objects. Every gesture is imbued with meaning. The sound of the hot water being ladled from the kettle, the sharp, clean scent of the powdered green tea, the whisking sound as the tea is rubbed into a vibrant, emerald flow. It all combines into a single, harmonious sensory experience. You watch your master receive his bowl of tea. He holds it with both hands, admires its shape and glaze for a moment, bows slightly, and then drinks. And in that moment, you say it. The connection clicks into place in your mind. The philosophy that guides the tea master's hands is the same one that guides your own when you hold the rake. It's the principle of ikigo-ai-chi. One time, one meeting. This phrase, central to the tea ceremony, teaches that every gathering, every moment, is a unique and unrepeatable event. Therefore, it should be cherished and approached with the utmost sincerity and presence of mind. The bowl of tea the master is holding will never be exactly the same again. The light in the room, the temperature of the water, the mood of the participants. It is a unique confluence of factors that will never be perfectly replicated. It is a celebration of the transient moment. This, you realize, is exactly what you are doing in the garden. Each time you rake the gravel, you are creating a temporary perfection, a pattern that will be erased by the next day's raking, or by a sudden gust of wind. You are not building a permanent monument. You are performing a daily ritual that honors the fleeting nature of the present moment. The raked garden is ikigo-ai-chi made visible on a grand scale. Here's a little known, quirky fact about the tea ceremony that underscores this connection. Many of the most prized tea utensils are famous for their wabi-sabi qualities. A legendary tea bowl might be famous for its asymmetrical shape, its cracked glaze, or a clumsy-looking repair made centuries ago with gold lacquer kintsugi. These flaws are not hidden. They are celebrated as the history of the object. This is identical to the philosophy of the garden, where the weathered stone and the imperfectly grown moss are sources of beauty. The aesthetic judgment is the same. This deep, shared philosophy has led to a long-standing academic debate. Which came first? Did the aesthetics of the tea ceremony, with its focus on rustic simplicity and wabi-sabi, influence the design of Zen gardens? Or did the stark, minimalist philosophy of the gardens provide the spiritual and aesthetic framework for the development of the tea ceremony? The two arts evolved side by side, practiced and patronized by the same circles of monks and samurai, making it incredibly difficult to untangle their lines of influence. Did Sen no Raikyu, the legendary tea master, look to the gardens of his time for inspiration? Or did the garden designers of his era look at his tea practice and think, yes, that is the feeling we must capture in stone and sand? It's a classic chicken and egg problem, with scholars still arguing passionately for the primacy of one art from over the other. The ceremony concludes in the same profound silence in which it began. The tea master cleans his tools with the same focused grace he used to prepare the tea. As he leaves, he pauses on the veranda and looks out at your garden, the one you so carefully prepared. He catches your eye and gives a single, almost imperceptible nod. It's a nod of understanding, a recognition from one practitioner to another. You realize that the garden is not just a place for silent, solitary meditation. It is also a stage for the quiet, graceful performance of being present. Whether it is the act of raking sand or the act of whisking tea, the goal is the same: to find the universe in a simple gesture, to find the eternal in a single, fleeting moment. The years of relative peace have made you soft, not in body. The daily work keeps you lean and strong. But in spirit, the rhythm of the garden has become your own, a steady, predictable heartbeat. You have forgotten the chaos that lies beyond the walls. The world, however, has not forgotten you. It comes in the night. Not an army this time, but the raw, untamable power of nature. A typhoon. You awaken to the sound of the wind, a low moan that quickly escalates into a demonic shriek. The entire temple groans and shudders around you. Rain comes not in drops, but in horizontal sheets, hammering against the wooden shutters with the force of thrown stones. You and the other monks huddle together in the main hall, listening to the storm dismantle the world outside. You hear a terrifying crack and splintering sound, followed by a heavy thud that shakes the floor. The ancient pine tree that has leaned over the garden wall for centuries has lost a major limb. The storm rages for what feels like an eternity. When dawn finally breaks, it reveals a pale, bruised-looking sky. The wind has subsided to a mournful sigh. The master, his face grim, slides open the heavy wooden doors to the veranda. The scene is one of utter devastation. The garden, your sanctuary of order, is a vortex of chaos. The meticulously raked gravel is gone, replaced by a slurry of mud, leaves, and broken branches. The pristine white has been stained a dirty brown. Puddles of murky water stand where your perfect lines used to be. The great limb from the pine tree lies across one corner, its dead needles already beginning to brown. It has crushed a section of the plaster wall, leaving a jagged hole through which you can see the muddy, disordered world outside. You stand on the veranda, your heart cold, heavy stone in your chest. Weeks, months, years of work, erased in a single night. All the balance, the tranquility, the carefully cultivated peace, shattered. It feels like a personal violation, a physical blow. The younger monk beside you lets out a small sob. The master surveys the scene, his gaze sweeping over the wreckage. He is silent for a long time. You expect to see despair in his eyes, or perhaps anger, but instead, you see something else. The quiet, focused intensity. He turns to you and the other monks. "The jewels," he says, his voice calm and steady. "We begin. There is no time for grief. The work is immediate and immense. You spend the first day just clearing the debris. You and a team of monks saw the great pine limb into manageable pieces, pulling them away. You clear the smaller branches, the thick carpet of wet leaves, the stones and rubble from the broken wall. The work is hard, muddy, and exhausting. Then comes the gravel. It is a contaminated mess. You must painstakingly scoop it all up, wash it, and sift it to remove the mud and organic matter. It's a back-breaking, tedious process that takes days. As you work, you realize the sheer volume of material that makes up your serene sea. The illusion of effortlessness is maintained by an enormous amount of physical substance. This experience is a powerful, visceral lesson in a core Buddhist teaching, the doctrine of impermanence, Wamujo. Everything is in a state of flux. Nothing lasts. To cling to forms, to ideas, to even a beautiful, tranquil garden, is to set yourself up for suffering. The storm was not a malicious act. It was simply the nature of the world, asserting itself. Your job is not to create a permanent paradise that can defy nature, but to continuously restore order in the face of inevitable chaos. The practice is not in the finished product. The practice is in the act of beginning again. This is a foundational, mainstream concept in Zen, and you are now learning it not from a scroll, but through the ache in your muscles and the mud under your fingernails. Now for a strange and specific historical tidbit. The typhoons that regularly batter Japan have had a direct and fascinating impact on the structural design of temples and gardens. For instance, the iconic, gracefully curved roofs of Japanese temples are not just beautiful. They are an ingenious piece of engineering designed to handle heavy rainfall and high winds. The interlocking wooden brackets that support the heavy tiled roofs, a system called Tokyo, are incredibly complex and designed to absorb and distribute the shock of earthquakes and typhoons. Similarly, garden designers had to be practical engineers. They built sophisticated drainage systems, hidden beneath the gravel, to handle torrential downpours. The wall that was crushed by the falling branch was likely a simple plaster one, Important retaining walls were built with massive, interlocking stones, a technique you see in Japanese castles, designed to withstand the forces of nature. This brings up a debate that historians and conservationists still grapple with today. The ship of Theseus paradox in the context of a historic garden. If a garden like yours is devastated by a storm, and you rebuild it, replacing the gravel, rebuilding the wall, maybe even replacing a shattered stone, is it still the same garden? The famous King Kakeyoji, the Golden Pavilion in Kyoto, was burned to the ground by a monk in 1950 and was meticulously rebuilt. Is the shimmering building visitors see today the real King Kakeyoji, or is it a modern replica? Some argue that as long as the original design, materials, and techniques are used, the authenticity is preserved. The spirit and intention of the garden continue, even if the physical components are new. Others argue that the original physical material holds an irreplaceable historical value. The aura of the centuries-old wood or stone is lost forever. This is a constant tension in the world of historical preservation. When does restoration become replication? You are too busy to ponder such philosophical questions. You are covered in mud, your back screaming in protest. But as you work alongside your master, you notice he is not rushing. He washes each stone with the same care. He would on a normal day. He sorts the gravel with a steady, rhythmic motion. His calm is infectious. He is teaching you the most important lesson of all. The garden is not the pattern in the sand. The garden is the resilience in your own spirit. It is the willingness to pick up the tools and start over. No matter how great the devastation, the storm can destroy the form, but it cannot touch the practice. The garden is slowly reborn from the mud and chaos. The wall is repaired. The gravel is washed and returned to its place. A brilliant, almost dark white after its thorough cleaning. The memory of the storm fades, replaced once again by the steady rhythm of daily maintenance. The work of restoration has forged a new kind of quiet confidence in you. You have faced the worst and rebuilt. One morning, the temple gates open to admit a procession. It is small, but it moves with an aura of immense power that silences the birds and the trees. At its center, dressed in fine but sober silks, is a man whose face you recognize from woodblock prints sold in the market town. It is the new shogun, the military dictator who has, through brutal warfare and cunning politics, finally unified the country under his rule. The century of chaos is over. A new era of peace, enforced by the sword, has begun. He has come to this remote temple not for a grand ceremony, but, as the whispers from his attendants suggest, for a moment of quiet contemplation. He is known as a man of great contradictions, a ruthless warrior who is also a devoted patron of the arts, a brilliant strategist who writes delicate poetry. The temple's abbot and your master greet him with deep, formal bows. He gives them a curt nod, his eyes already fixed on the garden. He dismisses his retinue, except for two silent, ever-watchful guards who position themselves discreetly at the edges of the veranda. Then, he walks to the center of the viewing platform, the very spot where you had your first lesson, and sits, not in the formal sei-iza posture, but in a more relaxed, cross-legged position, his hands resting on his knees. Your master gives you a subtle glance. Your task for the morning had been to rake the garden. You were halfway through when the procession arrived. A vast section of the gravel is still smooth, unraked. The master's look is unmistakable. Continue your work. Your blood runs cold. You are to continue your simple, menial task under the direct gaze of the most powerful man in the country, a man who could have you executed for looking at him the wrong way. It feels like a test, or a trap. Every instinct screams at you to flee, to make yourself small and disappear, but the master's gaze is steady. You take a deep breath, pick up your rake, and step down onto the gravel. You begin to pull the rake toward you. Your movement stiffened clumsy at first. You are intensely aware of the shogun's presence behind you. You can feel his eyes on your back, a heavy, physical weight. You imagine his judgment of every slight wobble in your line, every hesitant step. You focus on the sound, Cha, HH. You focus on the feeling of the wooden handle in your hands. You focus on the sight of the clean, straight furrow appearing in the white gravel. You pour every ounce of your concentration into the simple, repetitive task. You try to remember the lesson from the silent rules. Disappear into the work. Let the self, with all its fears and anxieties, fall away. This scene encapsulates the complex relationship between the Zen establishment and the ruling samurai class. It is a well-documented historical fact that many powerful shoguns and daimyo were patrons of Zen temples and practitioners of Zen-influenced arts, like the tea ceremony. They saw in Zen a philosophy that valued discipline, self-control, and a direct, unsentimental approach to reality, qualities that resonated with their own warrior code, or Bushido. A garden like this was the perfect symbol of that ethos, controlled, disciplined, and serene, yet underpinned by a powerful, unyielding strength, like the stones. But here's a quirky and perhaps cynical little detail about that patronage. For many warlords, patronizing Zen was also a savvy political and cultural move. It was a way to legitimize their rule, by associating themselves with the profound philosophy and refined aesthetics of Zen. They projected an image not just of brute force, but of wisdom and cultural sophistication. Building a beautiful temple or commissioning a famous garden was a form of propaganda. It told the world, I am not just a conqueror, I am an enlightened ruler. The shogun sitting on the veranda might be genuinely seeking a moment of peace, but his presence is also a calculated performance of that peace. This dynamic creates an enduring historical debate. Did the samurai class genuinely embrace Zen philosophy, or did they simply co-opt its aesthetics? Were these powerful men truly seeking enlightenment, or were they just using the beautiful, austere brand of Zen to paper over their violent ambitions and add a veneer of philosophical depth to their reigns? Scholars on both sides can point to evidence. The personal writings of some samurai show a deep and sincere engagement with Zen principles. In other cases, their patronage seems shallow, a mere fashion statement. The truth is likely somewhere in between, varying from one individual to another. The man watching you could be a true seeker, a cynical manipulator, or most likely, a complex and contradictory mix of both. Slowly, as you continue your work, a strange thing happens. The shogun's gaze, which felt so heavy at first, begins to lighten. Or perhaps, you simply get used to it. The fear subsides, replaced by the familiar. Focused calm of the task itself, your lines become straighter, your rhythm more fluid. You are no longer a terrified servant performing for a powerful lord. You are simply a gardener, tending your garden, and he is simply a man, watching. The vast gulf of status between you seems to shrink, flattened by the profound, sheared silence of the garden. You finish your last line, erase your footprints, and step back onto the veranda, your heart returning to a normal rhythm. The shogun does not speak for a long time. He simply stares at the newly completed pattern, the fresh lines shimmering in the morning sun. Finally, he speaks, his voice a low rash. He does not look at you, or the abbot. He speaks to the garden itself. Still, he says, just that one word. Then he rises, gives a slight bow to the garden, and sweeps away with his guards, leaving behind only the indentation on the cushion where he sat in the lingering scent of expensive incense. The great man is gone. The garden remains. And you, its humble tender, are still here. The shogun's visit marks a subtle shift, not just in the world outside, but within the garden itself. With peace descending upon the land, the garden's role as a psychological fortress against chaos begins to feel less urgent. It can now be something more than just a sanctuary. It can be a place of pure, unadulterated aesthetic exploration. Your master, perhaps sensing this shift in the zeitgeist, decides it is time for you to learn one of the most advanced and paradoxical techniques of karesansui. How to create a waterfall without a single drop of water. He leads you to a corner of the garden you have always seen but never truly studied. Here, a tall, narrow, upright stone stands against the back wall. Below it, a cascade of smaller, flatter stones is arranged in a steep, tumbling configuration, flowing down to a flat, open area of raked gravel that represents the plunge pool at the base of the falls. This is the karesansui, the dry waterfall. For years, you have raked the gravel around this feature, but you have always seen it as just another rock formation. Now, the master invites you to look closer. He points to the tall, imposing stone at the very top. This, he explains, is not just a stone. It is the moment the water emerges, the lip of the falls. He then directs your eye to the arrangement of the smaller stones below it. They are not placed randomly. They are set at sharp angles, overlapping each other, creating a powerful sense of downward motion, of crashing, tumbling energy. Some stones are set on their sides, their sharp edges, suggesting the spray and foam of cascading water. Your job, he explains, is not just to rake the plunge pool at the bottom. It is to use the rake to enhance the illusion of flowing water. You will not use the standard, wide-toothed tray. You will use the small, handheld claw rake, the one for making eddies and currents. He demonstrates. Instead of raking in straight lines, he creates short, choppy, agitated patterns in the gravel at the base of the stone cascade, suggesting the turmoil of water hitting the pool. Then, further out, the lines become smoother, longer, and more curved, showing how the water's energy dissipates as it flows away into the larger river of the main garden. It's an act of pure artistic suggestion. You are using an inert medium, stone and gravel, to evoke one of nature's most dynamic and energetic phenomena. It's a magic trick, a sleight of hand that happens entirely in the mind of the viewer. To succeed, you must understand the physics of water. You have to have spent time watching real waterfalls, observing how water behaves, how it crashes, how it flows, how it settles. Only then can you hope to capture its spirit, its key or life force. In this static form, this technique of creating a dry waterfall is a classic, well-documented feature of many famous Zen gardens, like the one at Zen in Kyoto, which is renowned for its powerful, two-tiered dry cascade. It represents the height of the karesansui designer's art, to create movement out of stillness, sound out of silence. But here is a fascinating and less obvious detail about these dry waterfalls. Their composition is often dictated by principles found not in gardening manuals, but in classical Chinese landscape painting. The Song Dynasty painters of China were masters at depicting majestic, mountainous landscapes, often with dramatic waterfalls. They developed a whole set of aesthetic principles for composition, ideas about balance, negative space, and how to create a sense of depth and scale. These paintings were imported into Japan and deeply admired in Zen circles. The designers of gardens like yours were essentially trying to create a three-dimensional, walk-in version of a Chinese landscape painting. The arrangement of stones in your dry waterfall likely follows the same compositional rules as the brushstrokes have been a priceless ink scroll. This connection to painting fuels an ongoing scholarly debate. What is the primary medium of the karesansui? Is it a form of sculpture, with the stones as the primary objects of interest? Is it a form of landscape architecture, concerned with shaping space and human experience? Or is it, as the dry waterfall suggests, a form of three-dimensional painting, where the main goal is to create a pictorial composition meant to be viewed from a fixed perspective? Some scholars argue that the pictorial element is paramount. They point to the fact that many gardens are clearly designed to be seen from the veranda, framed by the posts and roof of the temple, just like a picture in a frame. They analyze the stone compositions using the language of art criticism, talking about foreground, middle ground, and background. But other scholars push back, arguing that this view is too static. They contend that the garden is a spatio-temporal experience. It's about the feeling of moving past it, the meditative act of tending it, the way it changes with the seasons and the time of day. To them, calling it a painting is to reduce a living, breathing space to a mere image. You don't have a final answer. All you know is the challenge before you. You take the claw rake and begin to work on the plunge pool. Your first attempts are clumsy. The patterns look more like random scratches than turbulent water. You are thinking too much like a gardener, Not enough like a painter or a physicist. The master patiently erases your marks and has you try again. He tells you to close your eyes. Listen, he says. You hear nothing but the wind and a distant bird. No, he insists. Listen to the waterfall. You stand there, eyes closed, and you try. You try to summon the memory of a real waterfall. The deep, continuous roar, the high-pitched hiss of the spray. You try to feel the cool mist on your face. And as you stand there, concentrating all your senses on an imaginary event, something clicks. You open your eyes. You look at the stones. And for the first time, you can almost hear the silent roar. You pick up the rake. Now, you know what to do. Time continues its slow, relentless march. And with it come subtle changes. The shogun's peace has settled over the land, becoming the new normal. New generations of monks arrive at the temple. Young men who have never known war. The stories of the Sengoku period are beginning to sound like ancient history. The garden, too, is aging. The moss you so carefully tend is thicker now. A lush velvet cloak. The wooden veranda has been repaired and replaced in sections. The new wood a pale contrast to the dark, weathered original planks. One day, an elderly scholar, a historian from the capital, comes to stay at the temple for a few weeks to study its architecture and records. He is a quiet, bookish man who spends most of his days poring over dusty scrolls in the temple library. He seems to carry the scent of old paper and dried ink with him. You see him one afternoon, standing on the veranda, staring intently at the garden, not with the meditative gaze you are used to, but with a look of intense, analytical scrutiny. He beckons you over. You approach, giving a respectful bow. Tell me, gardener, he says, his voice dry like rustling leaves. Do you ever wonder about the color? You are confused. The color, sir? Yes, he says, pointing a thin, scholarly finger at the brilliant white gravel. This, the sea of Shirakawa, so pure, so stark, so monochrome. It is the very image of Zen austerity. But was it always so? He then tells you something that completely upends your understanding of the world you inhabit. He has been studying some obscure temple records from the very earliest period of karesansui construction, centuries ago, and he has found fleeting, tantalizing references to gardens that were not white. He speaks of blue gravel, like the deep ocean, and rossets, and like the shores of sunset. He even found one poetic description that might refer to crushed green or black stones used to represent meadows or dark forests. The idea is shocking. A colorful Zen garden. It seems like a contradiction in terms. The entire aesthetic, as you have learned it, is built on the subtle, minimalist power of the monochrome palette. The white gravel is the blank page on which the mind can paint its own landscapes. To add color would be to literalize it, to rob it of its abstract, meditative power. It would be like a shout in a library. This is a real, though not widely publicized, theory in the world of Japanese garden history. The mainstream view, the one you see in every book and documentary, is that the white gravel and dark stones are the definitive, timeless look of the karesansui. But a minority of historians and archaeologists suggest this might be a later development. They argue that the early prototypes of these gardens, influenced perhaps by more colorful Chinese and Korean garden styles, may have used a wider and more literal palette. The move toward the purely monochrome aesthetic, they suggest, was a gradual evolution, a deliberate stripping away of color that happened over time as the Zen philosophy of wabi-sabi and simplicity became more dominant. The scholar presents you with a mind-bending piece of physical evidence he read about. At one ancient temple site, archaeologists excavating a long-vanished garden found trace mineral evidence suggesting the original gravel bed had been composed of a deep red, iron-rich sand. The garden that for centuries was imagined as a white, abstract sea might have originally been a startling, blood-red one. The implications are staggering. This theory, of course, is a subject of intense academic debate. The evidence is scant and open to interpretation. The poetic descriptions of blue gravel could be just that, poetic metaphors. not literal descriptions. The trace minerals could be the result of natural soil composition, not deliberate design. The mainstream historical consensus still firmly holds that the white gravel is the original and intended form, but the scholar's theory plants a seed of doubt in your mind. It's a classic case of absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The fact that we don't see colorful gardens today doesn't definitively prove they never existed. Perhaps they simply fell out of fashion and were replaced, their colorful origins forgotten. Like a black and white photograph of a world we know was once in full color. You look out at your garden, the sea of brilliant white you have spent a lifetime tending. You try to imagine it differently. What if the gravel were a deep, lapis lazuli blue? How would that change the feeling of the stones? They might look less like islands and more like golden shores against a sapphire sea. What if it were a soft, terracotta reed? The entire garden would feel warmer, more earthy, less celestial. The scholar sees the confusion and wonder in your eyes. History is not a stone, he says with a wry smile. It is a river. It changes. What we think of as timeless is often just the version of the story that has survived. He thanks you for your time and shuffles back to his dusty scrolls. You are left alone with this radical new idea. It doesn't change your work. The next day, you are still out on the gravel, rake in hand, pulling the same straight lines, but something inside you has shifted. You are no longer tending a timeless, unchanging masterpiece. You are tending one frame in a very long film. You are the custodian of the monochrome chapter of a story that may have once been riotily colorful. The garden is no longer a fixed statement, but a single, powerful word in a long, evolving conversation with the past. And you realize, with a strange sense of liberation, that the true history of this place might be even richer and more mysterious than you ever imagined. The scholar's visit leaves you with a restless mind. His questions about the garden's past have stirred up new questions about your own role within it. You have always seen yourself as a monk, your work as a form of spiritual discipline, a samu. But the historians talk of designers, aesthetics, and evolving fashions makes you see the garden through a different lens. You start to think about the origins of this place, not just the materials, but the hands and minds that first brought it into being. Who was the first person to stand on this spot and see not an empty patch of ground, but a potential sea of gravel and islands of stone? Was he a man like your master, a deeply religious person whose every action was a prayer? Or was he more like a master carpenter or a painter, a highly skilled craftsman who was hired for a job? You broached the subject one evening with your master, asking him who he was taught by, and who taught his master before him. The lineage, he explains, is long and hazy, but when you ask about the original creator, he simply points to one of the largest stones in the garden. The mountain was the first teacher, he says, a typically enigmatic Zen answer. But you are no longer satisfied with just poetry. You want to understand the history. Your work, which once felt so pure and spiritual, now seems to sit at a fascinating and blurry intersection of religion and labor, of faith and craft. This brings you face to face with one of the most interesting undebated questions in the history of these gardens. Were the original creators monks, or were they professional artisans? The popular image, the one that fits so neatly with the garden's spiritual purpose, is that of the Zen monk designer. The idea is that a garden like this is so profoundly tied to Zen philosophy that it could only have been created by a deep practitioner of that faith, a man who was building a physical manifestation of his own enlightened mind. This is the mainstream, romantic view. However, historical records, like the Sakuti Iki you heard about so long ago, suggest a different story. They point to the existence of a distinct professional class of garden designers. These were not necessarily monks in the religious sense, though they might have been lay priests or have had some affiliation with temples. They were known by various names, but the most evocative is his high date soul, the stone-setting priests. These individuals were specialists. They were masters of geology, understanding the properties and characters of different types of stone. They were engineers, skilled in the complex logistics of moving and setting stones that weighed many tons, and they were artists, with a deep knowledge of composition, symbolism, and aesthetic theory, often drawn from landscape painting. They were, in essence, highly sought-after landscape architects, and they would be commissioned by wealthy patrons, shoguns, nobles, and powerful monasteries to create gardens. Their fame was based on their artistic skill, not necessarily their level of spiritual enlightenment. Here's a curious little detail that gives a sense of how professionalized this role was. Historical records show that some of these is high dates had signature moves. One master might be famous for his dramatic, powerful stone compositions, while another might be known for his gentle, poetic arrangements. Some even signed their work with a distinctively placed, but seemingly natural, stone. Patronage was competitive, and a powerful monastery might boast about having a garden designed by a famous brand-name garden master, in the same way a modern museum might boast about owning a painting by a famous artist. This evidence of a professional class of garden makers has led to a long-running academic debate. It's a clash between the religious interpretation, the art-historical interpretation of the Zen garden. The religious scholars argue that to separate the garden from its Zen context is to fundamentally misunderstand it. They believe that even if professional artisans were involved, the guiding vision and the philosophical framework must have come from the Zen monks and abbots who commissioned the work. The artisans were just the hands. The monks were the mind. On the other hand, the art historians argue that seeing these gardens purely as religious objects is to ignore their sophisticated artistic and aesthetic qualities. They contend that these high dates were artists in their own right, who were using the vocabulary of Zen philosophy to create their own powerful works of art. They were not just illustrating a doctrine, they were creating something new. In this view, Zen was the medium, not the entire message. So, who was the true author of the garden you were tending? Was it the founding abbot of your temple, who had a spiritual vision and hired help to execute it? Or was it a now forgotten Haidatsu, a brilliant, perhaps eccentric, artist who traveled from commission to commission, leaving his mark on the landscape of Japan? The historical record is often too sparse to say for sure. You look at your own hands, calloused and capable. You know how to read the stones, how to feel the rightness of a line in the gravel, how to coax life from the moss. Is what you are doing an act of faith or an act of craft? Have you become a monk who gardens, or a gardener who happens to live in a monastery? You realize the question itself might be a false one. In this world, at this time, the two are not separate. The spiritual is expressed through the physical, the divine through the mundane. The mason who builds the cathedral and the priest who prays in it are part of the same gesture. You, your master, and the forgotten Haidatsu from centuries ago were all part of the same lineage. The garden is the physical meeting point of the monk and the artisan, a place where the hand and the spirit become one. The debate is not something to be solved. It is something to be lived, and you are living it. The sun rises and sets. The seasons blur into a long, continuous stream. You have been in this garden for so long now that you can no longer accurately measure the time. Decades, a lifetime. The young man who arrived, bewildered and clumsy, is a distant memory, a ghost you sometimes see in the reflection on a still pool of water. You are now the old man. Your hair is thin and white as the gravel you rake. Your back is permanently bent into a gentle curve, the posture of your profession. You move with the slow, deliberate grace of accumulated years. Your actions are so ingrained that they require no thought. Your body knows the work. The rake is no longer a tool you hold. It is a part of you, as familiar as your own limbs. The garden is no longer a place you tend. It is the landscape of your own mind. Its stones and mirroring the contours of your soul. One morning, as you are washing your hands after the morning's work, you pause and look at them. They are not the hands of a scholar or a priest. They are the hands of a laborer. The skin is like old leather, wrinkled and tough, and across your palms and at the base of your fingers are the thick, smooth, yellowish ridges of calluses that have been building for a lifetime. You trace the oldest of them, A hard knot of skin in the hollow of your palm where the end of the rake handle has rested for countless hours. It is a testament to every line you have ever drawn, every storm you have cleaned up after, every day you have spent in the service of this small patch of earth. These calusas are your biography, a story written not in ink, but in skin. They are the physical record of your devotion. This silent, physical transformation is a universal human experience, but it has a specific resonance in the world of traditional Japanese arts and crafts. This is the concept of shugyo, a kind of ascetic training where spiritual discipline is achieved through the relentless, repetitive practice of a physical skill. Through thousands of repetitions, the technique becomes second nature, freeing the mind to achieve a higher state of awareness. Or mushin no mind, the coal-used hand of a swordsman, the ink-stained fingers of a calligrapher, the potter's clay-caked knuckles. They are all signs of shugyo. They are badges of honor, physical proof of the years of dedication required to merge body and spirit into a single, fluid instrument. Your hands are a perfect example of this principle. But here's a quirky, less philosophical tidbit about calusas. From a modern medical perspective, a callus is simply the body's defense mechanism when a particular area of skin is subjected to repeated friction or pressure. The epidermis thickens to protect the underlying tissue from damage. It's a purely biological response. What's fascinating is how we, as humans, imbue this simple physiological process with such profound cultural and spiritual meaning. One person sees a hyperkeratotic lesion, while another sees the physical manifestation of a lifetime of discipline. Your hardened hands are a perfect illustration of how we project our stories and values onto the blank canvas of the physical body. This duality, the hand is a spiritual record versus the hand as a biological fact, echoes a larger debate that has been quietly brewing in the study of Zen and other contemplative practices. It's the dialogue between traditional belief and modern neuroscience. For centuries, the experiences described in Zen, states of no mind, enlightenment, or deep meditative calm, were understood purely in spiritual and philosophical terms. They were accessible only through introspection and ancient teachings. But in recent decades, neuroscientists have begun studying the brains of long-term meditators, like the monks in your temple. Using tools like fMRI and EEG, they can observe the changes in brain activity and even brain structure that result from thousands of hours of contemplative practice. They can see how the parts of the brain associated with self-referential thought, the me center, become less active during deep meditation, while areas associated with attention and sensory awareness become more active. This leads to a fascinating and sometimes contentious debate. Are these scientific explanations reducing a profound spiritual experience to mere brain chemistry? Or are they providing a new, complementary language to describe these states of being? When you feel that sense of disappearing into your work, that state of mushin, is it a mystical union with the cosmos, as the old texts would say? Or is it a measurable down-regulation of the default mode network in your prefrontal cortex, as a neuroscientist might argue? Some traditionalists feel that the scientific approach misses the point entirely, that it can describe the what but never the why or the deep, subjective meaning. On the other hand, some scientists and modern practitioners see neuroscience as a powerful tool for validating and understanding these ancient practices, stripping away the dogma and revealing the underlying universal mechanisms. The debate is ongoing. Does explaining the magic trick make it any less magical? You look down at your hands again. You feel the thick, reassuring hardness of the calusas. You don't need a scroll or a scientific instrument to understand them. They are their own explanation. They are the map of your life, the anchor that has held you steady through storms and seasons, through the chaos of war and the long, quiet years of peace. They are the silent, humble proof that you have not just looked at this garden. You have touched it. You have held it. You have shaped it. And in return, it has shaped you, right down to the very skin on your hands. They are a sign that you have lived a life of substance. The years have taken their toll not just on your body, but on the temple's small community. The master, who seemed as ancient and unchanging as the garden stones, has passed away. His departure is quiet and gentle as a leaf falling to the ground. You are now the senior monk, the guardian of the garden. The title feels strange, ill-fitting, like a robe borrowed from a much larger man. The silence in the temple is different now, heavier with the weight of your new responsibility. One spring morning, the abbot brings a young boy to you. He can't be more than 16. His eyes are wide with a mixture of awe and fear, and he shifts his weight from foot to foot, his movements clumsy and uncertain in the profound stillness of the veranda. He has been sent by his family to join the monastery. He will be your student, the abbot says simply, before leaving you alone with the boy. You look at him, and it's like looking into a strange, distorting mirror that shows you the past. You see yourself in his nervous posture, in his dusty sandals, in the way he stares at the sea of gravel as if it's an alien landscape. You remember the feeling of the heavy rake in your uncalloused hands, the sting of shame at your first wobbly line, the overwhelming confusion of the silent rules. You lead him to the tool shed, just as the master led you all those years ago. You take down a rake, not the old, venerable one you now use, but a newer, simpler one, and hand it to him. You see the same look of panic in his eyes as he feels its unfamiliar weight. A part of you, the tired, cynical part, wants to simply point to the gravel and walk away, to let him struggle just as you struggled. But you don't. You remember the long days of silent observation, the frustration, the slow, painful process of discovery. You decide to offer him a kindness that you were never explicitly given. To bridge the gap of silence just a little, you lead him to the veranda, to the central viewing spot. You have him sit. You don't quiz him or lecture him. You just sit with him in silence for a long time, letting the garden do the first teaching. Then, in a low voice that feels strange in your own ears, you point to the great stone. Dima, you say. Mountain, you point to the cluster of smaller stones. Shima, islands, you are repeating the first lesson, word for word, gesture for gesture. The cycle is beginning anew. This master-apprentice relationship, Shaitai, built on observation, imitation, and minimal verbal instruction, is the cornerstone of how traditional arts are passed down in Japan. It's a system based on the idea that true knowledge cannot be transmitted through words alone. It must be absorbed through the senses, through shared experience, through years of proximity to the master's living example. You learn by watching, by doing, by failing, and by watching again. The master's role is not to explain, but to embody the art. This is the orthodox view of how traditions are preserved. But here's a quirky, more modern psychological take on this ancient system. This method of teaching, with its lack of explicit feedback and its emphasis on silent observation, can be incredibly stressful and inefficient for the apprentice. However, it also forces a much deeper kind of learning. Without constant verbal instruction, the apprentice is forced to become a hyper-attentive observer, noticing the tiniest nuances of the master's movements, posture, and breathing. It fosters a powerful, non-verbal intelligence. It also weeds out those who lack the patience and dedication to persevere through the initial, frustrating phase. It's a brutal but effective filter. This tension between tradition and innovation in teaching methods is a subject of ongoing debate in Japan and beyond. As the world speeds up, many traditional crafts are struggling to find young apprentices willing to endure the long, silent, and often unpaid years of a classical apprenticeship. This has led to a debate. To preserve these arts, must the teaching methods adapt? Can you create a master in 5 years instead of 20 by using modern pedagogical techniques, instructional videos, and explicit, step-by-step guides? Traditionalists argue that this is impossible. They believe that the slowness and difficulty of the traditional method are not bugs in the system. They are the system. It's the struggle itself that forges the artist's character and deepens their understanding. To make it easier is to make it shallower. Modernists, however, argue that tradition should not be a cage. They believe that adapting teaching methods is essential for survival, and that new approaches can coexist with respect for the old ways. It's a debate about the soul of tradition itself. Is it found in the form or in the spirit? You take the new apprentice to the practice corner, the same one where your own shaky lines were born. You demonstrate the slow, centered pull of the rake. You create a single, straight line. Then you hand him the rake and stand back. His first attempt is, of course, a complete mess. A jagged, ugly scar on the pristine gravel. You see his shoulders slump, a flush of shame coloring his neck. You feel a pang of empathy so sharp it surprises you. You step forward, take the rake from his hands, and in a few smooth strokes, you erase his mistake, returning the gravel to a blank canvas. You look at him, and for the first time, you offer a small, encouraging smile. You don't say good or bad. You just gesture with the rake. Try again. In his frustrated, determined eyes, you see your own legacy. You are no longer just the tender of the garden. You are the tender of the next tender. Your life's work is not just to preserve the lines in the sand, but to pass on the knowledge of how to draw them. You are now a link in the long, fragile chain of transmission, a bridge between the past and the future. And in this new role, you find a purpose that feels as solid and as real as the caluses on your hands. With the apprentice by your side, your perception of time shifts once more. It is no longer a single, continuous stream, but a series of distinct, repeating cycles. Through his eyes, you begin to see the seasons with a freshness you haven't felt in decades. You are not just experiencing them, you are explaining them, demonstrating their impact on the garden and its routines. Spring arrives, and you show him how the warming air brings a risk of mold to the dampest patches of moss, and how to gently aerate them. You point out the single, ancient cherry tree outside the wall, whose falling blossoms are not a mess to be cleaned, but a brief, beautiful snowfall that you allow to rest on the gravel for a day or two. A fleeting celebration of impermanence. The pink petals on the whites, and are a poem that nature writes for you once a year. The apprentice, eager and literal, wants to sweep them up immediately to restore order. No, you explain gently. The garden must breathe with the seasons. Sometimes, the most important work is to do nothing. Summer comes with its oppressive humidity and the relentless, deafening chorus of the cicadas. The work is harder now. The sun beats down, making the white gravel almost blinding. You teach the apprentice how to work in the cooler hours of early morning and late evening. You show him how to spot the signs of heat stress on the mosses, and how to give them just enough water to survive without encouraging rot. The garden in summer is a lesson in endurance, in finding stillness amidst a buzzing, sweltering energy. Autumn is a season of graceful decline. The air turns crisp and clear. The leaves of the single maple tree visible over the far wall turn a brilliant, fiery red. Every day, a few more leaves drift down into your pristine sea of gravel. Your work becomes a constant, gentle sweeping, a meditation on letting go. You show the apprentice how to use a soft broom made of bamboo twigs to flick the leaves from the gravel without disturbing the raked patterns. It's a delicate, almost surgical task. Each leaf is a reminder that beauty is fleeting, and that all things must eventually fall. Then comes winter. The world outside the walls becomes muted and gray. The garden enters its most austere and powerful phase. The cold air makes the lines in the gravel seem sharper, the stones more solid and profound. Some mornings you wake to find the garden transformed by a layer of frost that makes every tiny pebble sparkle like a diamond. And on rare, special days, you awaken to a world of absolute silence, the garden blanketed in a thick, pure layer of snow. On the first snow day of the year, the apprentice is distraught. All his hard work, all the perfectly raked lines, have vanished under a smooth, white sheet. He sees it as a failure, a destruction of his efforts. You lead him to the veranda and have him sit. Look, you say, the snow has not erased the garden. It has revealed a new version of it. The tops of the stones have become islands of black against a sea of pure white. The snow has simplified the garden down to its most essential forms, creating a natural link wash painting, a sui boku ga. It is a lesson in how emptiness can define form, This deep connection between the garden and the changing seasons is, of course, a fundamental aspect of Japanese culture and aesthetics. The celebration of seasonal beauty is a core theme in everything from poetry and painting to cuisine. The garden is a microcosm of this, a carefully controlled stage where the drama of the seasons can be observed in its most refined form. But here's a curious, this romantic detail. The natural beauty of the seasons in a garden like this is often given a significant helping hand. For instance, that single, perfectly placed maple tree with the brilliant red leaves. It was likely chosen and planted there centuries ago specifically for its autumn color and its graceful shape. Gardeners might even use advanced horticultural techniques, like carefully pruning its roots or adjusting the soil's pH, to ensure its leaves turn that perfect, fiery shade of red at just the right time. The spontaneous beauty is often the result of meticulous, long-term planning and intervention. This behind-the-scenes manipulation leads to a philosophical debate that still echoes in landscape design today. Where is the line between cultivation and curation? Are you, as the gardener, simply a humble steward of nature, helping it to be its best self, or are you an artist, imposing a specific, idealized vision onto nature, editing out the parts that don't fit your aesthetic, like a messy profusion of fallen leaves and artificially enhancing the parts that do? Is the garden a collaboration with nature, or a conquest of it? The answer, as always, lies somewhere in the murky middle. The snow begins to melt. For a few days, the garden is a mess of slush and damp gravel. Then, as it dries, you and the apprentice begin the work of raking it anew. He is getting better. His lines are straighter, his rhythm more confident. As you work side by side, you watch a tiny green shoot pushing its way up from the cold earth at the base of the wall. A new cycle is beginning. You realize that your role is not just to teach the boy how to handle a rake. It is to teach him how to see the beauty, not just in the perfect raked lines, but also in the fallen petals, the blanketing snow, and the first green shoots of spring. The garden is not a static picture. It is a slow, endless cycle of change. It is not about fighting the seasons, but about dancing with them. The apprentice is no longer a boy. He is a young man, capable and quiet, his hands beginning to show the first signs of their own story in callus. He can now rake the entire garden by himself, his lines nearly as straight and true as your own. He tends the moss with a gentle, knowing touch. He understands the seasons. A strange feeling begins to settle over you, one you haven't felt before, a sense of redundancy. Your days change. You find yourself spending less time with the rake in your hands and more time sitting on the veranda, watching him work. Your role has shifted from being the primary actor to being the director, the guardian of the form. Your job is no longer to create the garden each day, but to maintain the standard, to ensure that the tradition is being upheld with precision and understanding. This is the art of maintenance. In a culture that often prizes novelty and innovation, it's an underappreciated skill. It's not about making something new. It's about preserving the integrity of something old. It requires a different kind of eye, a different kind of discipline. You are no longer looking for your own creative expression. You are looking for fidelity. You watch the angle of the rake, the spacing of the lines, the way the apprentice erases his footprints. You are preserving a form that has been passed down for centuries. Your interventions are minimal and always gentle. One day, you might notice the swirling patterns he has raked around a stone are a little too tight, a little too agitated for the calm feeling of the day. You don't grab the rake and fix it. You wait until the evening, and over a cup of tea, you might talk about the nature of water, how it flows more gently in a wide, deep pool. You will understand the lesson, and the next day, the circles will be softer, wider. This concept of maintenance as a high art form is deeply embedded in Japanese culture, most famously represented by the regular, ritual rebuilding of the Ai's grand shrine. This ancient Shinto shrine has been completely dismantled and rebuilt from scratch on an adjacent site every 20 years for over 1,000 years. This process, called the Shiki-en-ien Sanyo, ensures that the building techniques are passed down from one generation of carpenters to the next. and that the shrine itself, while physically new, remains spiritually and technically ancient. It's a radical solution to the problem of preservation, the belief that the only way to truly preserve something is to continuously renew it. Your work in the garden is a smaller, daily version of this same principle. Now for a wonderfully mundane and quirky detail about the maintenance of these gardens. One of the biggest and most persistent enemies of the pristine white gravel is cats. Local cats, attracted to what must seem like the world's largest and most aesthetically pleasing litter box, have been a challenge for garden tenders for centuries. Temples have tried all sorts of creative, low-tech solutions over the years, from laying down bamboo grids at night to placing bottles of water around the perimeter of folk belief with no scientific basis. The quiet, spiritual battle between the Zen monk and the neighborhood cat is a small, unwritten comedy that has played out in these serene spaces for as long as they have existed. This focus on maintenance over creation highlights a subtle but important philosophical debate. What is the ultimate goal of a space like this? Is it a place for ongoing spiritual practice, or is it a finished work of art to be preserved? If you see the garden primarily as a tool for practice, a kind of spiritual gymnasium, then the daily act of raking is the most important thing. The state of the garden at any given moment is secondary to the mindful labor that goes into it. In this view, a site warbled in a line is not a flaw in the artwork. It's simply a reflection of the practitioner's state of mind on that particular day. The garden is a living record of the practice. However, if you view the garden as a priceless masterpiece, like a painting in a museum, then the primary goal becomes conservation. The ideal is to keep it in a state that is as close as possible to the original designer's intent. The maintenance work is not a spiritual practice for the gardener, but a curatorial duty to the artwork. In this view, the wobbly line is a flaw, a deviation from the perfect form that must be corrected. Most modern temples that are also tourist sites have to navigate this very tension. They are simultaneously active centers of religious practice and museums displaying a historical artifact. The monk raking the sand might be doing it as part of his own spiritual training, but he is also keenly aware that thousands of visitors will be photographing his work, expecting to see the perfect Zen garden from the postcards. The maintenance is both a private act and a public performance. You watch the apprentice finish his work for the day. He steps back onto the veranda, bows to the garden, and then turns and bows to you. The lines are good. The garden is calm. The tradition is safe. For now, you feel a sense of peace, but also a faint, wistful sense of detachment. You have become the memory of the garden. Your hands are clean. Your role is to watch, to remember, and to guide. You have raked your last line without even knowing it was the last. Your life's work now is to ensure that the endless repetition of the art continues long after you are gone. Now that your hands are still, your other senses begin to sharpen. For decades, the garden has been a primarily visual and tactile experience for you. The sight of the lines, the feel of the rake. But as you sit on the veranda day after day, a new dimension of the space reveals itself. You begin to truly listen to the garden. You start to discover its soundscape. At first, the silence seems absolute, the same profound hush that greeted you on your first day. But as you learn to attune your ear, you realize the silence is not empty. It is a canvas, and upon it, a subtle symphony is constantly playing. The most dominant instrument is the wind. You learn its many voices. There's the soft, sibilant whisper as it moves through the needles of the ancient pine tree, a sound that is there almost every day. A constant, gentle breathing. Then there's the sharper, rustling sound it makes when it catches the broad leaves of the maple, a sound that only appears in late spring and summer. And there's the hollow, mournful whistle it makes around the eaves of the temple roof during a winter storm. Then there are the sounds of life. In summer, the overwhelming, high-frequency drone of the cicadas is not a noise that breaks the silence, but a sound that becomes the silence, a sonic texture that defines the heat of the day. At dusk, you can hear the chirping of crickets, a softer, more rhythmic pulse. And on a quiet morning, you can sometimes hear the gentle, liquid warble of a bush warbler, the UJUSO, a sound so prized in Japan that its song is considered a sign of spring's arrival. You even begin to notice the sound of the gravel itself. When the apprentice is raking, you can tell from the veranda, just by the sound, whether he is using the wide-toothed raked, satisfying shade or the fine-toothed one higher, lighter cis. You can hear the subtle crunch of his feet on the entry stones, a sound of intention and purpose. This idea of a soundscape fukai I know OTO or the sound of the scenery is an integral, though often overlooked, part of Japanese garden design. A garden is not just meant to be seen. It is meant to be experienced with all the senses. The sounds are as carefully considered as the visual composition. This is most famously demonstrated by the shishi-odoshi, or deer scarer, a device you don't have in your garden but have heard about from others. It's a hollow bamboo tube, pivoted on an axis. It slowly fills with water from a small pipe until it becomes top-heavy, tips over to empty the water, and then swings back. It's hard and striking as stone with a sharp, clean clack. The sound is designed to be startling, a sudden punctuation in the silence that brings you back to the present moment. It's a sonic tool for middenfosens. Here's a quirky and wonderful little detail about sound in Japanese culture. There is a government-sponsored list called the 100 Soundscapes of Japan. It's a collection of sounds, both natural and man-made, that are considered culturally significant and worthy of preservation. The list includes things like the crashing of drift ice in the Sea of Akatsuki, the sound of a specific temple bell in Tokyo, the chirping of cicadas in a particular forest, and even the clatter of looms in a traditional weaving district. It's a formal recognition that a nation's auditory heritage is just as important as its physical monuments. The subtle sounds of your garden are part of this invisible, treasured landscape. The very concept of listening to a garden silence brings up a fascinating philosophical and scientific debate. Does silence actually exist? From a purely physical perspective, absolute silence, the complete absence of sound waves, is almost impossible to experience on Earth. Even in a specially constructed anhikik chamber, you can still hear the low-frequency thumping of your own heartbeat and the high-pitched hiss of your nervous system. This has led some philosophers and Zen practitioners to argue that silence is not an acoustic property of the external world, but a psychological state of the listener. Silence is what you experience when you stop paying attention to the noise of your own internal monologue, the chatter of your thoughts. In this view, the purpose of a quiet space like your garden is not to eliminate external sound, but to provide a calm, stable auditory background that makes it easier for you to notice and quiet the noise within your own mind. The debate, then, is whether the silence you are experiencing is in the garden or in you. Is it a quality of the place, or a quality of your perception? One afternoon, a light rain begins to fall. The apprentice covers the rakes and takes shelter. You, however, remain on the veranda. You close your eyes and listen. You hear the soft, pattering sound of the first drops on the broad maple leaf. You hear the different, sharper ticking sound as the rain hits the gravel. You hear the rhythmic dripping from the roof tiles onto the paving stones below. Each surface has its own voice, its own response to the rain. The garden is singing a quiet, percussive song. You realize that for most of your life, you have been so focused on creating the garden that you have forgotten to listen to it. The silence is not an absence. It is a presence. It is a space filled with the subtle, beautiful music of the world, a music you can only hear when you finally become still enough to receive it. The long, slow dream of the Edo period, an era that seemed as unchanging as the garden stones, finally shatters. The world outside, which had been kept at bay for centuries, comes crashing in. Great, black-hulled ships, smoke belching from their stacks, have appeared in the bays near the capital. They are crewed by strange-looking foreigners, barbarians with pale skin and loud, powerful cannons. The shogun's peace is revealed to be a fragile bubble, easily burst by the industrial might of the outside world. The country is thrown into turmoil. A new emperor, young and ambitious, is restored to power. The age of the samurai is declared over. A frantic, chaotic rush to modernize, to catch up with the West, begins. The temple, once a place of serene detachment, is now filled with anxious whispers of these bewildering changes. You hear words you don't understand. Telegraph, railroad, parliament. The entire foundation of your world is cracking. One day, a group of these foreigners comes to the temple. They are not like the shogun or the merchants. They are tall and dressed in strange, restrictive clothing, dark, heavy wool suits and stiff collars. Even in the heat, they move with a brisk, confident energy that feels jarring and loud in the quiet temple grounds. They are accompanied by a nervous-looking Japanese interpreter. The interpreter explains, scholars and diplomats from a country called America. They have come to see the famous garden. You and your apprentice stand to one side, watching as they stride onto the veranda. They don't sit. They pace. They play. They talk in loud, booming voices that echo in the stillness. Then one of them produces a truly bizarre object. It's a box on 3 spindly legs. He pulls a black cloth over his head and fiddles with the box, pointing it towards the garden. There is a bright flash of light and a puff of smoke, accompanied by a sharp, chemical smell. The man emerges from under the cloth, a satisfied look on his face. You and your apprentice stare, bewildered. What was that? A weapon, a surveying tool. The interpreter, sensing your confusion, explains with an air of worldly superiority. It is a camera, he says. It captures an image of the garden, a perfect likeness, frozen in an instant. It makes a painting with light. The concept is almost impossible to grasp. To take the garden, the living, breathing space that changes with the light and the seasons, and freeze a single, silent instant of it onto a piece of paper. It seems like a strange and sterile kind of magic, a violation of the garden's spirit. The garden is a process, an experience. It is not a static image. You have spent your entire life creating and tending a place that is all about the present moment. The Ichigo-ichi. And this device seems designed to rip a moment out of its context and pin it down like a dead butterfly. This moment, the first encounter between a traditional, contemplative space and the new technology of photography, is a pivotal one. The camera, which was introduced to Japan in this era of rapid modernization, the Meiji Restoration, would go on to have a profound and complicated impact on how these gardens were seen and understood, both within Japan and around the world. Photography made it possible to disseminate the image of the Zen garden globally, turning remote temple gardens into international icons of Japanese culture. But here's a quirky and important side effect of that photographic gaze. Early photography, with its long exposure times and monochrome plates, had its own aesthetic biases. It was particularly good at capturing strong graphic forms, textures, and contrasts of light and shadow. It was less good at capturing subtle nuances of color or the feeling of being in a space. As a result, the photographs that spread around the world emphasized the most photogenic aspects of the gardens. The stark, graphic patterns in the white gravel and the bold, sculptural forms of the rocks. The Zen garden look, minimalist, abstract, black and white, was perfectly suited to the medium of black and white photography. This leads to a fascinating historical debate. Did photography simply document the Zen garden? Or did it help to invent the modern idea of what a Zen garden is? Some scholars argue that the camera's gaze fundamentally changed our perception. By selecting and emphasizing these minimalist, graphic qualities, photography helped to solidify the image of the karesansui as the ultimate expression of Japanese empty aesthetics. It filtered out other, less photogenic garden styles like the more colorful, vibrant strolling gardens of the Edo period and elevated the dry garden to a position of supreme importance. In a way, the camera didn't just take a picture of the garden. It created the idea of the garden that the rest of the world would come to know. The foreigners pack up their strange box. Before they leave, one of them, through the interpreter, asks you a question. How old is it? You don't know how to answer. Is the garden as old as the stones, which are millions of years old? Is it as old as the temple, from centuries ago? Or is it only a day old, freshly raked this morning? It is new today, you finally say. The The interpreter struggles to translate this, and the foreigner looks at you with a mixture of pity and confusion, as if you are a simple-minded old man who doesn't understand the question. They leave, their heavy shoes clattering on the stones of the path. You are left in the ringing silence, the faint, alien chemical smell still hanging in the air. The garden is the same, yet something has been taken. An image of it is now captured, frozen, on its way to a distant land where people will look at it without understanding the scent of the moss, or the sound of the wind, or the feeling of the rake in their hands. The camera has arrived. The garden will never be entirely your own again. The arrival of the camera was just the beginning. In the decades that follow, the world rushes into your small, quiet corner with increasing speed. The Meiji era gives way to new emperors. New wars fought with new and terrible weapons, and a new, fervent sense of national identity. Japan is no longer an isolated dreamland. It is a major player on the world stage, and your garden, to your bewilderment, has a role to play in this new drama. More and more foreigners begin to make the pilgrimage to your temple. They are different from the first group of startled photographers. They are armed not with cameras, but with notebooks and theories. They are art historians from Germany, philosophers from France, wealthy collectors from England. They come to study the garden, to measure it, to analyze it, and to explain it to the West. You watch them from the veranda, listening to their interpreters translate their strange, abstract conversations. They use words you have never heard before to describe the world you know so intimately. They talk about asymmetrical balance, negative space, minimalist aesthetics, and abstract expressionism. They compare the stone arrangements to the paintings of a man named Cézanne and the sculptures of someone called Brancusi. They seem to be trying to fit your garden into their own boxes, to understand it through the lens of their own culture's history and ideas. One particularly earnest young man from Boston, with spectacles and an eager expression, spends a whole week at the temple. He follows you and your apprentice around, taking copious notes. He wants to understand the Zen mind that created this space. He asks you, through his interpreter, a series of deeply philosophical questions. Does the void represent the Buddhist concept of sunyata? He asks. Or is it more aligned with the Taoist notion of the uncarved block? You simply smile and hand him a weed you have just pulled from the moss. That was a weed, you say. Now there is not. He looks defeated, as if you have failed some profound intellectual test. He came seeking mystical Eastern wisdom, and you gave him a simple, concrete fact. He doesn't understand that for you. The philosophy is not in the theory, it is in the weeding. This discovery of the Zen garden by the West in the late 19th and early 20th centuries had a massive impact on Western art and culture. It profoundly influenced modernist movements, inspiring artists, architects, and designers with its clean lines, minimalist principles, and focus on natural materials. The image of the serene, abstracts, and garden became a powerful counterpoint to the perceived chaos and ugliness of Western industrial society. This is the mainstream narrative of the garden's journey to the West. But here's a quirky and slightly controversial part of that story. The version of Zen that these Westerners were discovering was, in many ways, a version that was being actively packaged and curated for them by Japanese intellectuals of the same period. Figures like D.T. Suzuki, a brilliant English-speaking Japanese scholar, were instrumental in translating and interpreting Zen for a Western audience. In doing so, they inevitably simplified and romanticized it, emphasizing the parts that would be most appealing to the Western mind: the mysticism, the connection to nature, the aestheticism, while downplaying some of the more rigorous, disciplined, or culturally specific aspects. The Zen the West fell in love with was, to some extent, a carefully constructed export product. This has led to an ongoing academic debate about Orientalist and the Zen garden. The term Orientalist, coined by the scholar Edward Said, describes the way the West has often viewed the East through a lens of romantic and exotic stereotypes. The debate centers on this question. When Westerners look at your garden and see a timeless oasis of mystical calm, Are they appreciating the garden for what it is? Or are they just projecting their own fantasies of an exotic, spiritualist onto it? Are they engaging with your culture? Or are they consuming a stereotype of it? Some argue that any cross-cultural appreciation is a good thing, and that the Western interpretation, even if not perfectly authentic, has its own validity and has produced great art. Others argue that this Oriental's gaze is fundamentally distorting. It strips the garden of its real, complex history, its connection to political power, its evolution over time, and turns it into a simple, pleasing symbol that serves the West's own cultural needs. They argue that the Bostonian's quest for mystical wisdom prevents him from seeing the simple, practical reality of the garden in front of him. You don't understand the complex theories, but you feel the effects. The garden is becoming famous, but it is becoming famous for being something other than what it is. It is being turned into a concept, and the foreigners come seeking a grand, abstract idea, and they seem almost disappointed by the simple, physical reality of the place. They want to talk about the void, but they don't seem to notice the way the light hits the moss in the late afternoon. They want to discuss the symbolism of the stones, but they don't feel the satisfying heft of the rake in their own hands. Your apprentice is fascinated by these visitors. He listens to their theories and begins to read the books they leave behind. He starts using their words, talking about the garden's graphic dynamism and its existential purity. You worry, just a little, that he is beginning to see the garden through their eyes, that he is learning the menu but forgetting the taste of the food. One day, you find him standing on the veranda, looking at the garden with a furrowed brow. I was just thinking, he says, that the central stone grouping lacks a certain formal tension. You walk over to him, pick up the simple bamboo broom, and start sweeping the fallen leaves from the wooden planks. You don't say anything. You just sweep. The rhythmic, whispering sound of the broom is your only answer. It is a reminder, before all the theories, before all the books, there is the work, there is the sweeping, the weeding, the raking. The garden is not an idea, it is a place, and your job is not to interpret it, but to care for it. You are ancient now. You move through the world as if through deep water, every gesture slow, deliberate, and steeped in the gravity of time. Your apprentice is a man in late middle age, his own hair touched with the frost of winter. His apprentice, a young, earnest man, now does most of the heavy raking. You are the living ancestor of the garden, a silent, stooped figure who sits on the veranda. Your presence as much a part of the landscape as the stones themselves. You have seen the garden endure everything. Typhoons, the fall of shoguns, the arrival of foreigners with their cameras and their theories. You thought it was immutable, that its core could withstand any change. But now it faces its most insidious enemy, time itself. Your apprentice comes to you one morning, his face etched with worry. He leads you to the great central stone, the mountain that has been the anchor of your world for your entire life. He points to its base. The hairline crack you noticed what feels like a lifetime ago is no longer a hairline. It has widened, deepened, a small, wedge-shaped piece of the stone, perhaps the size of a rice bowl, has flaked away and lies on the gravel. The mountain is crumbling. The apprentice is deeply distressed. This is not like a storm, which can be cleaned up. This is a wound in the very heart of the garden. The stone, the symbol of permanence and eternity, is proving to be as transient as everything else. His instinct, trained by a new era of scientific thinking, is to intervene. We must fix it, he says. I have read about special resins. Epoxies. We can glue the piece back on, fill the crack. We can make it look as if it never happened. His words send a chill through you. To fix it, to smear this ancient, living stone with a modern, chemical glue, to hide the wound, to deny the reality of its aging. It feels like a profound lie, a violation of the very principle of wabi-sabi that the stone so perfectly embodies. Your instinct is to do nothing, to let the stone age as you have aged, to accept the crack as you accept the wrinkles on your own face. The floor is not a floor, it is its history. This is the ultimate dilemma of restoration. a conflict that rages in the heart of every museum curator and historical preservationist. It is the clash between two distinct philosophies, the principle of honest repair versus the ideal of seamless restoration. The philosophy of honest repair, which aligns with your gut instinct and the traditional wabi-sabi aesthetic, argues that any repair made to a historical object should be visible. The repair should respect the original material and not try to deceptively imitate it. A famous example of this is kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with lacquer mixed with powdered gold. The cracks are not hidden. They are highlighted, celebrated as part of the object's unique history. The breakage and repair become a beautiful feature, not a shameful flaw. On the other side is the philosophy of seamless restoration, a more modern, Western-influenced approach. This school of thought believes the goal of restoration is to return the object to its original state, to make the damage disappear as if it never occurred. The restorer's hand should be invisible. This approach prioritizes the original artist's intent and the object's aesthetic wholeness over the evidence of its historical journey. Your apprentice, with his talk of invisible resins, is arguing for this kind of restoration. This debate is not just academic. It has real-world consequences. How do you restore a faded fresco, a crumbling statue, or a cracked stone in a Zen garden? Do you fill the gaps with a neutral color to show what is new and what is old? Or do you try to perfectly replicate the original artist's brushstrokes? Experts are deeply divided, and the correct answer often depends on the specific object and its cultural context. Was the garden stone intended to be an unchanging, perfect form, or was it intended to be a natural object that would weather and change with time? The original creator is not here to ask. You and your apprentice are at an impasse. He represents the new world, a world that believes it can fix anything with technology, a world that fears decay. You represent the old world, a world that finds beauty in that decay, that sees wisdom in acceptance. For days, the broken piece of stone sits on the gravel, a silent accusation. The apprentice researches his modern glues. You sit on the veranda and simply watch the stone, as if in mourning. Finally, you have an idea, a compromise that feels true to the spirit of the garden. You call your apprentice over. No glue, you say, your voice a dry whisper. You instruct him to take the small, broken piece of stone, not to reattach it, but to place it carefully, respectfully, at the foot of the great mountain, like a child sitting at its parents' feet. It is not hidden. It is not erased. It is given a new place, a new role in the composition. It is a quiet acknowledgement of the change, a testament to what has been lost. Then, you tell him to take his rake and draw the water patterns around the newly configured base. The lines must now flow around to stones instead of one. The garden must adapt to its own new reality. He looks at you, and you see the conflict in his eyes resolve into a look of deep understanding. He sees the wisdom in the gesture. It is an act of restoration that is also an act of acceptance. It is a repair that is honest, a solution that honors both the past and the present. He performs the task with a new kind of reverence. He places the small stone. He rakes the new patterns. The garden is different now. It is wounded, imperfect, and yet it is whole again. It has learned to live with its own history, just as you have. The legacy is not just in the form you preserve, but in the wisdom you use to guide its inevitable transformation. The sun feels different today. It's the same sun, of course, rising in the same slow arc across the sky, but it feels warmer on your thin skin. Its light softer, as if filtered through fine paper. You sit in your usual spot on the veranda. The wood smooth and familiar beneath you. The young apprentice, your apprentice's apprentice, is raking the garden. His movements are strong and sure. The lines he creates are straight and clean. The sound is a steady, rhythmic whisper. Shy, each. You watch him, but your focus is wider now. Your gaze takes in the whole scene, a composition you know better than your own reflection. The great mountain stone, with its small, fallen child resting at its feet. The islands of moss-covered rock, sombering in their sea of pale gravel. The enclosing wall, its plaster stained with the memory of 1,000 rains. An old pine, its branches reaching like the arm of an old man. It is all as it should be. Your mind drifts back. You remember the face of your first master, his silent instructions, the weight of the rake in your clumsy, youthful hands. You remember the terror of the typhoon, the satisfaction of the restoration. You remember the intimidating gaze of the shogun, the earnest confusion of the foreign scholars with their strange theories, the acrid smell of the photographer's flesh. You remember the seasons, an endless cycle of falling blossoms and melting snow. You have seen your world change, and you have seen it stay completely the same. The young man finishes his task. He steps back onto the veranda, his face flushed with the effort. He bows to the garden, then to your apprentice, and finally, to you. You give him a slight nod, a flicker of acknowledgement. The transmission is complete. The chain is unbroken. You look down at your hands, resting in your lap. The calluses are still there, but they are softer now. The skin around them thin and translucent. They are like geological formations, the remnants of a lifetime of pressure and friction. They no longer feel like badges of honor or records of labor. They just feel like a part of you. You look back at the garden. The sun is directly overhead. The gravel is a brilliant, shimmering white. The shadows are short and dark, clinging to the base of the stones. The young man has just finished raking. The lines are perfect, radiating a sense of deep, profound calm. You lean your head back against the old wooden post of the veranda. Your breathing is slow and shallow. The rhythmic shh of the rake is still echoing in your ears. Or perhaps it's just the sound of your own blood flowing. You think about the very first line you ever raked, the wobbly, pathetic scratch. And you think about this last line, the one the boy just drew. In the grand scheme of things, in the 500-year story of this garden, are they really so different? Both are just temporary marks on a shifting surface. Both are gestures of intention in a world of impermanence. Both will be erased by tomorrow. The mainstream historical view is that these gardens are important cultural artifacts, complex symbols of a sophisticated philosophy. They are subjects for books, for photographs, for scholarly debate. But as you sit here, at the end of it all, you understand the truth is much simpler. A little-known Zen story, or perhaps just a piece of folklore. Tales of a young monk who asks his master, "What is the secret to enlightenment?" The master replies, "When I am hungry, I eat. When I am tired, I sleep." The secret, the story implies, is to be fully present in the simple, mundane acts of living, and this reveals the final, quiet debate about the garden. Is its meaning found in the complex historical narratives, the scholarly interpretations, the philosophical symbolism that scholars and foreigners love to discuss? Or is its true meaning something much more direct and personal, something that can't be written in a book or captured in a photograph? Is the purpose of the garden found in the intellectual act of understanding it, or in the physical act of tending it? For you, the answer is clear. The meaning was never in the theories. It was in the work. It was in the feel of the cool stone, the damp moss, the warm sun. It was in the ache in your back and the calluses on your hands. The garden is not a riddle to be solved. It is a life to be lived. You close your eyes. The sun is warm. The sound of the world fades, replaced by a soft, internal hum. You draw one last line, not in the gravel, but in your mind. It is perfectly straight, perfectly calm. It stretches from the beginning to the end, and then it too is erased, leaving only a perfect, peaceful, shimmering white. The steady, rhythmic sound of the raking continues, even after the story has ended. It is a sound that has become a part of the air itself, a gentle, persistent hum that lulls the world into a state of quiet repose. You can feel the sun on your eyelids, a soft and pleasant warmth. As you drift in that peaceful space between wakefulness and sleep, the hard edges of the day begin to dissolve, melting away like sugar in warm water. The garden is no longer a place you are visiting. It has become the landscape of your own peaceful mind. Each soft, shy touch of the rake is like a slow, deep breath, pulling in tranquility and letting go of thought. The worries and lists and plans that clutter the mind are gently swept away, leaving behind a smooth, green surface, a sea of calm. You can feel your own breathing beginning to sync with that ancient rhythm. A slow, easy tide of air. In doubt, the stones of the garden stand silently in your mind, no longer representing mountains or islands, but simply representing a deep, unshakable stillness at your very core. They are anchors in the quiet harbor of your approaching dreams. You are safe. You are calm. You are exactly where you need to be. The journey is over, but the peace remains. It settles over you like a soft, warm blanket. Let the gentle sound of the rake be the last sound you hear as you drift away, into a sleep as deep and as quiet as a 500-year-old garden at dawn.